Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
Young Master Ethan, it's about time to go and greet the bride. The steward of the Joel family was impeccably dressed, but his expression carried a contemptuous and mocking smile. Ethan nodded indifferently, following behind the butler, ready to face his miserable fate. Seeing him like this, the butler's face showed disgust. Remember your status. As a nobleman, this behavior is unbecoming. He couldn't help but laugh at himself. A nobleman about to marry the lowest of the orcs, this was undoubtedly a death sentence for his political career. Although being being exiled to that kind of place was practically the same as dying. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but complain about the master's new wife. She was too cruel to Ethan, as if she was afraid he could survive in that hellish place, and she completely destroyed his potential. Even if a nobleman who has married a half-orc has great potential, those high-ranking nobles will not lower themselves to marry their daughters to him. As he was thinking this, he led Ethan to the wedding venue, a simple outbuilding. Although it was called a wedding, no nobles except Ethan were present, which was enough to show the Joel family's attitude towards the marriage. In front of the side room stood a richly dressed, frivolous-looking young man. Ethan knew that his half-brother was causing him trouble again. Aesop looked at his older brother and had already figured out how to mock him as usual. You. Bang! Before he could finish speaking, Aesop was punched and sent flying, losing several of his pearly white teeth. Ethan stroked his fist. What are you trying to say? Aesop was shocked that his usually gentle brother could launch such an attack, and he knew that his past actions were unjustified, so he could only cover his mouth and leave angrily. Do you know what you've done? The butler shouted, his old face contorted with rage. Ethan turned to look at him, his face still expressionless. You old B*******, are you trying to commit insubordination? The butler's face flushed red. I'll tell the master. After uttering this harsh but harmless remark, he hurriedly left. Within the Joel family, Ethan remained a nobleman, and the authority of the nobility was not to be challenged. Ethan couldn't be bothered with the two clowns. Even though his father was being completely manipulated by his stepmother, he was still the head of the family. He's getting married today and heading to the border to expand his territory tomorrow, so even if there's any punishment, it won't affect him. Thinking of this, Ethan sighed and, somewhat at a loss, pushed open the door. Upon hearing the door open, Wolf's body trembled uncontrollably. This day has finally come. Wolf closed her eyes, awaiting her fate. What came into Ethan's view was a wolf girl whose ears were twitching incessantly. After locking the door behind him, Ethan approached the increasingly panicked girl and hooked her chin with his right hand. The servants dressed her up quite well and took good care of her after she was sent to the mansion. Coupled with her good looks, she was the type that Ethan was satisfied with. Let's make this our last moment of revelry before exile. As he was thinking, the wolf girl opposite him mustered her courage and spoke. My lord, please be gentle. Ethan wasn't in a hurry. He asked, may I have your name? The wolf girl opened her eyes, revealing pale red pupils. My name is Wolf, sir. I like her even more now that she has white hair and red eyes. You won't have a good life if you marry me. Wolf gave a wan smile. I had no choice, my lord. My time at the Lord's manor has been the best life I've ever had. Ethan knew that Wolf had probably been captured from the border and resold by slave-hunting teams, and that she certainly hadn't enjoyed life either at the border or during her capture. As if to convince himself, Ethan said, I had no choice but to do it. Wolf nodded slightly as if accepting her fate. Wolf's face was flushed, her eyes were glazed, and she awkwardly accepted Ethan's kiss, trying her best to resist his tongue but failing miserably. Ethan held the not too big but not too small fruit in one hand and wrapped the other arm around Wolf's waist, the two pressed tightly together. Upon hearing the heavy breathing coming from the room, the guards outside hurriedly left the side room and reported to their respective masters. A marriage in name only is shameful enough, but the truth is even more humiliating. Late at night, exhausted from all the commotion, Wolf leaned on Ethan's shoulder and drifted off to sleep. Ethan, meanwhile, stared into deep thought at the virtual panel that appeared before him. Heaven have mercy, he has tried every possible method over the past 18 years but still hasn't been able to unlock his cheat ability. I was originally planning to live a normal life and fend for myself, but it turns out I'm going to get married. The information about himself and the strange wife beside him was clearly written on it. Name, Ethan Joel. Rank, second-tier knight. Partner, Wolf. Territory, none available. That's all the information about yourself on that panel. As for the rest, you'll probably need to own territory to unlock it. The partner's information can also be displayed in detail. Name, Wolf. Rank, Tier 2 Wolf Rider. Territory skill, Loyal Wolf Guard. Favorability rating, Stranger. This is all that the information panel offers Ethan. A simple yet efficient way to display what he owns. What interested him most was the Loyal Wolf Guard skill, which he had never heard of before. Territory skills. Could they be abilities that directly affect one's territory? Driven by curiosity, Ethan clicked on the skill's description. Designate 5 guards with a loyalty level of 60 or higher and promote them by 1 rank. This skill will also be enhanced as Wolf's favorability increases. It's a skill with a very direct and powerful effect. The very word specifiable gave Ethan some ingenious ideas which, if used well, might allow him to get more people to obey him. Moreover, the wolf girl beside him was quite strong. As a slave, she had retained the strength of the second tier, and after advancing 1 tier she would be considered a combatant. The Batterson Empire is a no-man's land between the orcs and demons. Heaven knows how long a lowly pioneering knight like him can hold out. The nobles there won't reason with him. As for his own father, it would be good enough if he didn't hold him back. Of course, if that wicked stepmother were to insist on doing something, Ethan assured her that a woman like her would be powerless to withstand physical judgment. In his past life, he was transformed into a senior student's postgraduate recommendation pill simply because he was scratching an itch in the library and eventually committed suicide under endless cyberbullying. In this life, he will never die at the hands of a woman again. Filled with anticipation and nervousness about heading to the territory the next day, Ethan fell into a deep sleep, holding Wolf in his arms. Wolf woke up exhausted, and a maid who had been waiting for her presented her with brand new clothes. Even though she was just a half-orc, she was still nominally a lady of the Joel family until she received Ethan's orders. After changing into comfortable clothes she had never worn before, Wolf asked the maid beside her, "Where is the master from last night?" She still harbors an unknown fear about her fate. Beside her was Ethan's personal maid, Catherine, who, barring any unforeseen circumstances, would soon be traveling to the territory with Ethan. Catherine's attitude was neither humble nor arrogant. "Young master is still receiving his investiture from the head of the family. You will wait here for his orders." She maintained only basic respect for this nominal young mistress. After all, Wolf could be abandoned by the young master at any time, and no one dared to guess the young master's decision. That was a nobleman? Inside the Joel family's council chamber, Earl Oldman, the head of the Joel family, sat in the main seat flanked by prominent figures from the family, most of whom were Ethan's relatives. They may not attend yesterday's shameful marriage, but they must be present for the investiture of a knight with a pioneering mandate. Even though the Joel family is an Earl family, they can only obtain this pioneering order, which represents the imperial privilege, every 10 years. Now, however, it is to be handed over to a young man who has just started out. There were certainly some complaints, but Oldman's authority within the family was unquestionable, especially since this was his son. In exchange, Ethan could only be knighted. With Ethan kneeling on one knee, Oldman placed the sword, a symbol of power, on his shoulder, officially completing the investiture ceremony. "In the name of Oldman, Patriarch of the House of Joel, I bestow upon you the title of Knight Lord of Log Town on the border of the Wasteland Province. Begin your journey immediately, and may the glory of your ancestors bathe you." After reciting the prayer in a less than solemn manner, Oldman began to recite the help the family could offer Ethan. 500 serfs including losses. There were 600 at the start, 3 knights and 12 squires, 1 steward and 10 servants. There are 12 donkeys and 3 cows. There were 12 tons of food, enough to feed the group for 2 months, including black bread, wheat, dried meat, and so on. And most importantly, 100 gold coins. This sum of money, which accounts for a quarter of the Joel family's annual tax revenue, is Ethan's livelihood. All expenses of the territory are derived from it. After everything was read aloud, the simple ceremony was completed, and the crowd dispersed, already convinced that Ethan would die in that no man's land. A nobleman who can bring no benefit? There's no need to be friends with him, even if Ethan is their nephew or something. There's no need to waste the effort of talking to them. Only Ethan and his son Oldman remained in the vast council chamber. The personnel will assemble at the city gate within 1 hour and depart immediately without delay. After saying that, Oldman handed Ethan a bag containing the aid his family had given him and documents proving his identity. Oldman turned and left, not giving his son a chance to speak. Ethan watched his retreating figure, suppressing the questions that had been lingering in his heart. Since he's unwilling, there's no point in asking. The humiliation I suffer today will be repaid one day. Ethan returned to the side room where Wolf sat anxiously on the bed, awaiting her fate. Watching the Wolf girl's ears tremble with nervousness, Ethan sighed inwardly. He didn't want to drag others into this unless absolutely necessary, but since Wolf could help him, he had no choice but to take her on. Do you want to stay here or come with me to the border? Although it was a question, Wolf did not have a choice. Please don't abandon me. She had long accepted her status as a slave, and she was well aware that a slave without a master would only suffer a worse fate. A large hand touched the top of her head, and Wolf tried her best to resist the itch caused by the touch on her wolf ears. Although they are called orcs, apart from having a pair of wolf ears and a tail, they are almost no different from ordinary people. As top-quality goods supplied to the Earl's family, the slave-catching team naturally prioritized selecting those with outstanding appearances. After being treated to delicious food and drink, Wolf's appearance naturally became quite remarkable. She was pleasing to the eye even just by looking at her. Ethan wouldn't mind having another pretty face to develop a relationship with, not to mention that Wolf's loyalty was relatively reliable. Her loyalty level on the panel is a full 60. It barely qualifies as a level of trust. After teasing Wolf for a while, he stood up and instructed Catherine, who was standing beside him, "Have my knights wait for me at the door." Catherine accepted the order and left. As Ethan's maid since birth, she held a high position among the servants and was also Ethan's most trusted confidant. Before long, several knights with varying moods gathered at the door, awaiting their new master's summons. Some of them are still young, while others are already old and have accomplished nothing. The only thing they have in common is that they are not well liked. Ethan pushed open the door and they all knelt down on one knee. "Greetings, Lord Ethan." Ethan personally helped them up one by one. These were his most powerful fighting force and one of his few talented individuals. "Tell me your situation in detail so I can understand it better." As they recounted their story, Ethan's disappointment grew. Although he had learned some basic information when he helped them up, these people were utterly rotten. Not only have they been stuck at Tier 1 for so many years, but they are also at the bottom of the rankings in every aspect among knights. After the last knight finished speaking, they looked at Ethan, whose eyes remained calm and couldn't help but wonder to themselves. They know their own family best, they are aware of their own abilities. Not only are they bad at cooking, but they also lack popularity. Otherwise, they wouldn't have entrusted the task to the once most favored second young master. Ethan smiled warmly, nodded to indicate that he understood, and then ordered, "From now on, we're all on the same side. Go and prepare yourselves, we'll depart immediately." If these three guys have any redeeming qualities, it's only their lack of ambition and loyalty. Even the least loyal of the three of them has a loyalty score of 72. Their upbringing instills in them a lifelong commitment to their master, making them trustworthy enough for Ethan to rely on. As it happens, Ethan only gives opportunities to those who are loyal. Their names are also familiar: Afen, Lasu, and Joe. Ethan thought for a while before realizing that they shared the same name as those three losers under Valon. In a sense, these names are indeed not wrong. The butler assigned to Ethan by the family also came to see his new master. Unlike the previous three incompetent stewards, Marcus was a highly capable old butler. He was qualified to compete for the position of head steward, but the head of the family ordered him to give it up. Ethan looked at the meticulous old acquaintance before him. This was an old servant who had been working for the family since before Ethan was born, and importantly, he was quite experienced. Ethan could confidently entrust certain tasks to him. Marcus quickly got to work. "My lord, the serfs and servants have assembled and supplies are being moved. We can depart in less than an hour." Ethan nodded. "What about the quality of the servants and serfs? Compared to the cavaliers, these are the people he cares about most. On the one hand, it can be cultivated, and on the other hand, it represents the productivity of the territory." The old steward remained expressionless and described in detail what he had seen. "The servants are not of good quality. Only 3 or 4 have a mediocre appearance. The serfs were of extremely low quality. They not only lacked any skills, but many were also elderly, weak women or children." Ethan frowned. "How many of them do you think will make it to the border alive?" Marcus had participated in the migrations of serfs many times and had a lot of experience with these matters. Under standard food rations, there would probably be fewer than 500 people. Ethan mentally calculated the value of the serfs to him, considering whether they were worth his sacrifice. If their food rations were doubled, would more of them survive? The wasteland province of the Badesan Empire is truly the northern frontier, and the border situation there is only worse. It would take at least a month and a half to get there from the Gale province where the Joel family lived. The long journey and harsh weather conditions were enough to kill most of the weak serfs, and even if they arrived at the territory, they would hardly have the strength to work for a short time. "Then we'll need to replenish our food supplies by almost half again along the way, which will cost at least 10 gold coins." After Marcus finished speaking, he watched Ethan's reaction. Although Ethan had shown great intelligence since childhood, as his butler, still needed to conduct a thorough evaluation. Experienced butlers know how to serve masters with different personalities. If the master is rather dull-witted, they will have to spend more time handling matters for him privately. Ethan didn't answer directly but instead asked another question. "Including food supplies and the construction costs needed to reach the territory, how much would it approximately cost? If you're not in a hurry to build the castle, then it can be completed in less than 30 gold coins." Marcus's words were still an attempt to gauge Ethan's character. If Ethan insists on building the castle, then he can only try to persuade him otherwise. Ethan nodded. "Prepare some more warm clothes for them, and we'll set off immediately once that's done." Marcus wrote all these arrangements down in a small notebook he carried with him. "The master is being a bit too kind to the serfs. Perhaps we should remind him of this later." Marcus hurried off after Ethan gave no further orders. The faster they got things done, the sooner they would reach their destination. Ethan poured his father's last gift onto the table. This money was almost all of his startup capital. He wasn't without savings, he just used them to exchange for things of greater value. 5 sets of standard full-body knight armor. For the sake of the master's second son, the blacksmith in town gave him a set of 2 gold coins, but after counting and recounting, the number seems to be more than 100 gold coins. Ethan even spotted silver and copper coins among them. The inventory is complete. There are a total of 123 gold, 36 silver, and 89 copper. Ethan fell silent. Could this be all of Oldman's hidden savings? Ethan, with a hint of disdain, put the silver and copper coins into another bag and looked at Wolf, who was still sitting restlessly. He waved his hand and Wolf walked up to him somewhat awkwardly. Wolf closed her eyes tightly and began clumsily unbuttoning her new clothes. Ethan gently pulled her and Wolf fell into his arms. Ethan teased, "It's not even evening yet, what's the rush?" Wolf blushed and nervously clasped her small hands together. "My lord, She wanted to say that she wasn't the kind of person who lacked self-respect, but shyness prevented her from saying it. Ethan caressed her furry ears, the delicate texture feeling incredibly comfortable. "You don't need to call me sir, you can just call me Ethan or master, or husband if you prefer."
"Yes, sorry."
Looking at the adorable wolf girl, Ethan's gloomy mood improved considerably. He shook the money pouch in his hand and asked her a question. "Can I trust you?" Wolf looked up and, without understanding why, agreed. Ethan placed the bag of change into her hand. "This money is for you to keep. You have the right to use it, and you also have the right to decide whether that butler named Marcus asks you for money. Wolf nodded blankly. Although she didn't understand, it didn't stop her from carrying out her master's orders. After kissing Wolf's pale pink lips, Ethan left the side room to personally oversee the serfs' preparations. As the future master of their lives, Ethan has a responsibility to make them remember his face. As a beneficiary of the system, Ethan never opposed slavery, nor did he intend to treat those slaves as human beings. The reason they gave them warm clothes and barely enough food was simply to minimize their own losses. On the way, Ethan received a notification from the system. Wolf's favorability rating has increased from 0, stranger, to 20, first encounter. She doesn't dislike getting to know you. Ethan saw this as a good start since going from 0 to 1 is always the hardest thing. The skills Wolf taught him were quite useful, and Ethan decided to find a suitable opportunity to use them. When Ethan arrived, Marcus was vigorously whipping the serfs who were carrying supplies. Smack. The sound of whips whistling through the air mingled with curses, making the already hunched backs of the serfs even more difficult to straighten. Damn lowly commoners, you're already exhausted from carrying so little. And you, how dare you take a break?
Get up.
Marcus caught a glimpse of Ethan's arrival out of the corner of his eye, and under the scorching sun, he whipped the serfs even more vigorously. Ethan walked over to Marcus and stopped him from swinging the whip. This is too much work. Marcus, wiping the sweat streaming down his face, said respectfully, "For the sake of the master, my hardship is nothing. No, I mean this is too wasteful of the serf's energy. I think we might be able to adopt a gentler approach to supervision." Marcus gave an awkward laugh and nodded noncommittally. Those lazy serfs are like donkeys, how can they move forward without being whipped? Marcus muttered to himself, but he only dared to think it to himself. As the slow-moving serfs loaded all the supplies onto donkey carts and ox carts, the slaves gathered together, awaiting their lord's judgment. Ethan, dressed in aristocratic attire, looked down indifferently at these not-so-cheap laborers. Marcus stood before him, speaking on behalf of his will. "You lowly slaves, before you now stands the great lord, the mighty knight, our master, Ethan your." Lord Ethan has shown his mercy. He will provide you with enough food and warm clothes. Now show your loyalty to him. As the serfs who had been arranged earlier took the lead in kneeling, everyone else followed suit, pressing their heads to the ground and shouting, "Long live the Lord." Ethan nodded in satisfaction, and Marcus knowingly stepped back behind him. "Now you may go to the night squire and receive my gift." Marcus's whip lashed down, and the chaotic crowd barely managed to form a queue as they took their supplies from the night squires. Anyone who causes trouble will be whipped at best and beaten to the point of near death at worst as a warning to others. This was a necessary sacrifice, and Ethan saw it but said nothing. In his view, this management style was too outdated and must be improved in the future, if I can live to see the future. Finally, after 2 hours of busy work, the convoy slowly headed north. Oldman stood atop the highest point of the castle, overlooking the procession and watching his proudest son depart into the distance. The bumpy carriage came to a stop, and Ah Fen, who was driving for Ethan, leaned back and said, "Master, it's time to stop and rest. We need to prepare lunch." It was the height of summer, and Ah Fen had finally found a shady grove so that the delicate old man wouldn't get sunburned. The servants were preparing lunch for Ethan, while the ever-moving crowd in the distance struggled to keep up with the night's pace. Ethan turned to the butler beside him and asked, "How far are we from Log Town?" "Sir, we'll arrive in Log Town in less than a day." Ethan gazed into the distance, seeing only desolation. The northern border doesn't look like it's inhabited. Logtown once had a lord, but that was over 100 years ago. To this day, there are only a handful of lords in this region, and Ethan is the only pioneering knight like himself. Unless someone's completely out of their mind, no one would dare to expand their territory here, especially since it's right next to the demons and orcs. It's dangerous and has little value. Ethan returned to the fairly spacious carriage and waited for the servants to bring him fresh food. Wolf, who had been waiting, came over and gently massaged his shoulders. During this time she had learned how to get along with her master. The man before him was not cruel, on the contrary, even though his knights often displeased him, he remained gentle. And I myself was not mistreated, but sometimes her owner would touch her inappropriately. Wolf's life here was something she never dared to imagine before. She didn't have to fight for food and water, and she even had servants to attend to her as the mistress. If this kind of life could continue, that would be wonderful. Ethan, who was contemplating his next move, suddenly froze. Wolf's favorability rating increased from 39 first meeting to 40 favorability. She thinks you are a good person. After cultivating the relationship for a month and a half, the affection level has finally been raised by 1 level, but her territory skill hasn't been upgraded yet. Maybe it's not high enough, Ethan pondered. He wasn't entirely familiar with this system yet. Thinking of this, he leaned back and fell straight onto the lap of the person behind him. Wolf blushed, her eyes darting around as she tried to avoid eye contact with Ethan. She knew her master had come to amuse her again, but she was still not used to such close contact. Fortunately, her master hadn't done anything inappropriate to her these past few days. Even if you actually did it, it wouldn't be considered crossing the line. After all, they are legally married. Yes, husband and wife. Seeing Wolf's wolf ears trembling with shyness, Ethan couldn't resist pinching them. They still felt just as comfortable to the touch. Wolf let out a soft gasp. Her ears were a very sensitive area for her. Ethan looked at the cute wolf girl and wicked thoughts began to arise in his heart, but considering that they were outside after all, and he was afraid that such a sudden act would damage his image, he forcibly restrained himself. The butler's voice came from outside the curtain. "Master, the meal is ready. Shall we begin to eat?" Ethan sat up. "Come in." Hearing the sound of the curtain being lifted outside, the wolf girl hurriedly pretended to massage Ethan, using Ethan's body to cover her face. Catherine personally served Ethan his meal. As his personal maid, she placed great importance on the safety of his food. "Young master, the situation has been dire lately. Please bear with us." This is a sentence that Catherine says every day. Although Ethan doesn't think it's a big deal, she still feels sorry for the young master she's watched grow up. The title Young Master was a privilege reserved only for her. As is customary, the meal was served to 2 people. Ethan had already said that Wolf should be treated as the mistress of the house, and Catherine and Marcus could only keep their opinions to themselves. They discussed this in private and concluded that it was either a teenager's mischief or a particular quirk of the nobility. In any case, in time the master will realize how lowly orcs are, and then he will give the order. So they tacitly agreed not to mention the matter in front of Ethan, while also giving the wolf girl the respect she deserved. Ethan patted the little hand on his shoulder and Wolf obediently sat down beside him to eat with him. Although the meal was simple, Ethan was still satisfied with the white bread spread with honey and the fried ham. For Wolf, who had once experienced hunger, this was an even greater delicacy. Only after Ethan's repeated instructions did Wolf carefully imitate her master's actions, eating in small bites. "As my wife, you must learn proper etiquette. Overeating is unacceptable." She was stunned when she first heard this. Her childhood experience told her that if she didn't eat fast enough, she wouldn't get enough food and she wouldn't have enough time to work. But after Ethan's few minor punishments, Wolf successfully changed her bad habits and became presentable at first glance. After the meal, the maid cleared the plates from the table. Wolf nestled obediently in Ethan's arms as usual, and in their private space the two could do whatever they wanted. For example, grooming the fur on the wolf girl's tail. The wolf's tail is its core, so this constantly swaying long tail became Wolf's most sensitive part. Ethan, however, particularly enjoys rubbing these furry things, which often causes her to let out soft moans of pleasure. Although she wanted to say that only kin in the wolf pack groom each other's tails, she realized that considering the relationship between the two, it made sense both emotionally and logically. So they had no choice but to silently endure it, and it's really comfortable. Ethan learned of this by chance. He had only touched her casually that day, and Wolf's affection level actually increased while she let out a sweet moan. Perhaps this is what they call the body being honest. Hearing the sounds coming from the carriage, Catherine silently left the carriage. I don't know when the young master developed this habit. He used to be quite virtuous. After she finished grooming, Wolf's face beamed with an innocent smile and her tail wagged rhythmically with joy. Ethan looked at the innocent wolf and asked a crucial question. Can you read? The wolf girl's smile froze. She had a bad feeling. She feared her days ahead wouldn't be easy. Her innocent eyes revealed a clear naivete. "We wolves are illiterate." Ethan loved her bewildered expression, so he kissed her on the cheek and said, "Once the territory is settled, I'll have Catherine teach you." Wolf did not object. She knew that no one could refuse their master's orders, so she could only obediently nod in agreement. A day later, the convoy, carrying a long line of people behind it, arrived at their destination, Log Town. This ancient site still retains some traces left by the lords of yesteryear. A square paved with stone bricks with a few decorative stone pillars standing haphazardly on it, but the patterns on them have long been weathered and are no longer discernible. Besides that, all that remains is a stone ruin which looks like it was once a nobleman's castle. After this territory was conquered by the orcs, the symbol of this civilization was destroyed. As for the other buildings, they have long since become one with the earth over time. Today, the entire town of Log is overgrown with weeds and completely desolate. Without Ethan giving any orders, Marcus spontaneously organized his men to clear a space for the Lord to stand on. Rather than a butler, he was more like a consul in this team. "Sir, the castle repair schedule may have to be postponed." Marcus wiped his sweat, explaining his statement. "We need to build you a place to stay first and then give those lowly people a place to live. Otherwise, even more of them will die." Ethan nodded, satisfied with his idea. "That's right, these slaves are my precious property. To protect them, my base doesn't need to be too nice. It's just a temporary place to live anyway. The master is kind." This land is a veritable wasteland, which means Ethan has to start everything from scratch. Fortunately, although this area was barren, the previous lord was still somewhat intelligent. A large river with a considerable flow flows through the territory, branching out into numerous tributaries that radiate throughout the entire area. Although Ethan was only a knight, he should theoretically only be entitled to a fiefdom of 1 or 2 villages. In a desolate area, the size of a town is nothing. Moreover, he has a pioneering order. This region is rich in a type of high-quality timber, commonly referred to as logs. This means that building materials can be sourced locally without having to buy or sell them from other lords. Although there are few lords in this area, they are all full of martial virtue and their territories are developing quite well. If needed, one will inevitably have to deal with them. The serfs worked very hard under the supervision of the knights Squire and Marcus, which was related to Ethan increasing their food rations by half again. He knew that one couldn't work if one wasn't well fed, and the extra food consumed was far less valuable than accelerating the early stages of the territory's development. Even if the current rations are 3 times the original amount, it's only equivalent to giving them enough flour paste. As for black bread, that's rationed. Even so, it took the serfs a week to complete building themselves and their dwellings. There was no other way. None of the more than 500 serfs had any skills, so all the construction had to be devised by those few knights. After all, literate people are already considered the most cultured people in the territory. The final result was naturally not good. Either the foundation was unstable or it was tilted and leaning, making it barely habitable. Ethan's residence, on the other hand, was built with great care, its frame constructed from high-quality, large logs, making it quite spacious and grand. In addition to a bedroom and a study, there is also a meeting hall. The servants were not entitled to live with Ethan and could only build simple outbuildings for him. This was the prototype of log town or log territory. Driven by whips, the serfs began to work hard to cultivate the land and plant some fast-growing potatoes. If you're lucky, the potatoes will ripen before winter. As for crops like wheat, which were only available to high-ranking officials, Ethan simply ordered them to be planted again next year. There are only a dozen or so of them in total. They can simply buy some supplies from nearby territories when necessary. The food problem was relatively easy to solve, but in Ethan's eyes there was only one most important thing in the world: force. Especially in such a no-man's land, having a loyal and reliable strong army is more practical than having 100 acres of fertile land. He currently commands 3 knights and 12 knight squires. This power was beyond the reach of a knightly nobleman. It was equivalent to the standard armed force of a baron. This was probably his father's final gift to him. 3 knights, even if they were the weakest of the 3, they had still come into contact with extraordinary beings. The lords near him were mostly barons and knights who were subordinate to them. Log Town is located in the Northern Wind region on the border, and the most powerful lord in this region has inherited this title. Viscount Northwind has the right to mobilize the nobility of the entire region during wartime. This is a survival strategy unique to border regions. The so-called wartime is when the demons and beastmen invade. Every autumn, small groups of demons and beastmen would sneak into the border and plunder everywhere. According to tradition, the orcs would attack in about 2 months, which is why those relatives and stepmothers didn't think they would come back alive. 3 first-tier knights plus several knightly attendants, and even with Ethan himself being a second-tier knight. They simply couldn't stop them. A lord who loses his territory is no different from a dead man. Defending the borders is an obligation that every nobleman must fulfill. If one cannot defend the territory, then one is not a nobleman. Ethan's forces might be no less capable than those small scout groups in terms of superior units, but his men were all serfs with no fighting ability whatsoever, leaving them no choice but to be slaughtered. With this in mind, Ethan had already made up his mind. He couldn't survive without becoming powerful. He waved his hand, beckoning Marcus, who was serving nearby, over. That trio, they taught the knight squires for a month and a half. Who was the best teacher among them? Marcus took his master's instructions very seriously. It's Sir Rasu. He's very skilled at teaching apprentices, and the squires are progressing rapidly. Bring him here. Before long, a rather burly knight entered, knelt on one knee and said, "My lord, what brings you here? I think our fledgling territory doesn't need to be so particular about etiquette." Ethan carefully examined the honest-looking knight before him. Rishu truly won his heart. Throughout his journey, he acted with great discretion, neither overly impulsive nor overly conservative, perfectly embodying the stereotypical image of a knight. Of course, what pleased him most was Rasu's loyalty score of 80 points. This level already qualifies someone as a trusted confidant. "I heard you've done a pretty good job teaching those kids." Rasu shook his head. "You flatter me, I merely elevated them to the level befitting knight squires." He's right about that. His men were just a figurehead before. In a real fight, they might not even be as good as a single-armed soldier. He has indeed made great achievements in training trainees of this level to the level of attendants in just 1.5 months. Ethan poured him a cup of tea. "I think you deserve a reward. What do you want?" Lasu remained seated upright, not touching the teacup beside him. "If possible, I'd like some pastries, sir. My son's been craving something lately." Since leaving the city was due to her traveling with Ethan, Ethan could understand. "That's not a problem. Do you want anything else?" Rasu looked at the young man before him. His dark pupils held the ambition and arrogance of youth. He shook his head. "I ask for nothing more, sir." Contrary to his expectations, Ethan's eyes did not reveal disappointment but rather remained filled with unwavering confidence. "Are you content to remain a first-tier knight for the rest of your life?" Rasu was stunned. This question had never come before him. He picked up his teacup and slowly sipped the slightly bitter tea. If he hadn't been seriously injured back then, he wouldn't have been stuck at level 1 for his entire life. He was a loser, or rather, all 3 of them were losers. If they could see no future, how could they have been persuaded by the patriarch to come to this desolate place? That's why the 3 of them always got along well and never had a fight. Everyone's already suffered enough. There's no need for further fighting. If you had the opportunity to advance to the 2nd tier, what would you be willing to give up? "The tea in my hand has run out." Rasu declared firmly, "I'm willing to give my life." For the first time in all the time they had known each other, Ethan saw a sparkle in the eyes of this honest man. Rasu's heart was racing unconsciously. Advancing to the 2nd tier was his biggest dream. No knight is unambitious. Such a person is not qualified to be a knight. He was already prepared for the master to reward him with a mysterious potion, or to worship some unknown evil god. Or at the very least, to promise him a lucrative reward to motivate him to work hard. People need a goal to motivate them. Contrary to expectations, the master simply asked him to come closer and placed his hand on the top of his head. Boom! Rasu felt a loud bang in his head, followed by a surge of clear energy throughout his body which spurred the growth of his fighting spirit seed. A seedling gradually grew inside him. Rasu's eyes were glazed over. He knew very well that this was the mark of a second-tier knight, a level he had longed for. Having achieved this goal so easily, he was momentarily speechless. Ethan didn't move his hand away. He sensed that Rasu's loyalty was steadily increasing, eventually settling at 90. He's willing to go through fire and water for you, literally. Ethan was very satisfied with this performance. He hadn't misjudged him. There are many cultivation systems on this land, but in the Badeson Empire, only knights and mages are considered orthodox. Most other professions are considered trivial or unworthy of serious consideration. The mainstream knight system involves cultivating a seed of fighting spirit within the body. As the level of cultivation increases, the sprouts born from the seed will continue to grow, extending to all parts of the body and merging with the knight. The sprouting of a seed is the mark of a second-tier knight. This means that Rasu can now imbue his weapons with his inner fighting spirit, greatly increasing his attack power. If a first-tier knight can use his enhanced physique and profound skills to deal with 3 heavily armored infantrymen at the same time, even with the same amount of battle chi reserves, the second-tier knights could completely eliminate them in less than 5 minutes. The sharpness of battle aura cannot be withstood by ordinary armor. Even a first-tier knight, he could handle 3 at the same time. Although Rasu was once the worst tier 1, it can now be considered the worst tier 2. But the gap between a sprout and a seedling is still too large, larger than talent. Tier 2 is already considered a formidable force in this region, capable of shouldering significant responsibilities. Although one more Tier 2 might not be of much use in the upcoming attack, Ethan would even dare to launch a preemptive strike if there were enough of them. He had enough money on hand. Even if the lords quoted exorbitant prices, he could guarantee that his men would live until the harvest. Ethan was not weak-willed. In fact, one could say he was somewhat radical. Since the orcs come to the border to plunder every year, it means they always manage to get enough food. In other words, Ethan could rob them. Before that, he needed to prepare the territory and ensure it had sufficient military strength. Seeing Rasu gradually recovering from his euphoria, Ethan suggested, "Want me to spar with you?" "I wouldn't dare, sir. Your health is indeed precious." "Do you think you can hurt me?" Ethan scoffed without hesitation, saying that while his own talent wasn't exceptional, it was still better than this mediocre person. The most important thing is to force Rasu to give him a push. Knight's pride never tolerates humiliation, not even from their masters. Rasus had to prove himself. "Then, sir, shall we go to the training ground?" "Gather everyone, I'll be waiting for you there." The so-called training ground was just a temporarily vacated open space. Marcus originally envisioned using it as a building area, but the militant Ethan flatly rejected it. The knights and squires must not stop training, even if a few of the livestock freeze to death. Under Ethan's supervision, the servants worked very hard, and various equipment were hastily made in just a few days of training. Some wooden barricades and a few sand pits were barely enough for them to use. Upon hearing that the Lord was going to spar with Rasu himself, the knights and squires all dropped what they were doing and rushed over to watch the match. They knew Rasu's level. He was a bottom-tier first-class knight. As for Ethan, their master, they naturally wanted him to be as strong as possible. Ethan's performance in this competition will affect his image in their eyes. If he is too weak, he will inevitably become somewhat unpopular. The 2 men, dressed in leather armor, arrived at a lawn, their weapon a wooden training sword. It's simple, but it best showcases the knight's skill. Ah Fen and Zhou reminded the servants to watch and learn carefully, for their master was a powerful second-tier knight, bringing his precious body to demonstrate to them. It would be extremely good if everyone could learn even a little bit of the basics. The 2 men stood on the lawn and bowed to each other in a knightly salute. During knightly contests, there was no distinction between people of high or low status. This was also a reflection of the knight's position. Seeing Ethan's relaxed and casual movements, Rasu understood that the master wanted him to make the first move. So he whispered, "Master, be careful." Having said that, he charged at Ethan, brandishing his wooden sword. Against Ethan, who had received the best training from the Earl's family, his movements were full of flaws. After all, even if he gets promoted, his moves won't change at all. However, Ethan patiently exchanged a dozen or so blows with him first, allowing the onlookers to watch for a while. As soon as the battle began, Afen and Joe frowned. They exchanged a knowing glance before continuing to watch. They assumed that the owner was letting the water go, which was why Rasu had been able to hold out for so long. But the longer they observe, the clearer their perception becomes. Finally, the two looked at each other and whispered, "Do you think Rasu's speed is a bit too fast?" It wasn't just the speed. The power with which he swung his sword had also increased significantly, even more than when he used his full strength before. The sound of his sword missing its target was also much louder than before. The attendants behind him watched with great interest, completely unaware that the instructor in front of them was already drenched in sweat and covered in cold sweat. The smaller of the two, Afen said in a deep voice, "No matter what, Rasu has definitely gotten stronger. Let's ask him about it after the fight." Joe nodded in agreement. The three of you were all pretty much at the same level of novice. What are you planning to do? Suddenly become so strong, seize power. But Rasu's next move silenced the two, who stared wide-eyed at the wooden sword in his hand. A wisp of white mist emanated from the wooden sword, the mark of a second-tier knight. Moreover, it's only at the initial stage of the second level. Only a newcomer can't control the amount of battle chi injected, causing the battle chi to dissipate. With this attack, Rasu unleashed his full power, reaching the pinnacle of his strength and speed. Having already gauged the master's power from the previous probing, he no longer held back. The white special effects left the apprentices speechless, staring nervously at the lord opposite them. Won't the master be killed by this? Many people thought to themselves. Ethan gave a soft hum, and the wooden sword in his hand was perfectly covered with a layer of light green light, just the right amount, completely enveloping it without the slightest leakage. Facing the charging Rasu, he simply swung his sword casually, sending the wooden sword, which carried terrifying destructive power, flying. Rasu lost his balance as a result. Just as he was about to fall, Ethan grabbed his wrist with one hand and lifted the big man up. The crowd erupted in a thunderous cheer. Led by Afen and Joe, the servants and attendants shouted that their master was mighty. Ethan released his grip and raised his hands to enjoy the cheers of the crowd. Rasu knelt on the ground. "Thank you for your guidance, sir." After Ethan helped him up, he announced loudly, "Today, everyone will get an extra half-piece of jerky." Another round of thanks followed. The squires and knights were completely convinced of the lord's formidable military prowess, coupled with his skill in winning people's hearts. The servants almost wanted to shout, "Loyalty!
Honesty!"
This was Ethan's first step in winning people's hearts. He wanted everyone in his territory to fear and submit to him. Marcus stood to the side, wiping his sweat with a handkerchief. This is another loss. The inventory in the territory isn't much. As the servants and attendants were dismissed and returned to their posts, Rasu was pulled away by two of his comrades to exchange insights, and the lawn became empty again. Ethan took off his leather armor and unbuttoned his shirt. His inner lining was soaked with sweat from the exercise, and Wolf came over to wipe it off carefully. "Young master is truly amazing. You must have held back, didn't you?" The Wolf girl's eyes were filled with envy. As a fellow second-tier fighter, she couldn't defeat her opponent in one move. Moreover, Ethan's composure wasn't feigned. Ethan stroked Wolf's head with satisfaction. She was becoming more and more sensible. The wolf's fluffy ears twitched involuntarily from the comfort, and its tail began to wag rhythmically as well. "Young master's touch feels so good." Wolf closed her eyes and began to enjoy it. Catherine's eyes turned cold, and she thought to herself, "This isn't how a mistress should act." Of course, what angered her most was not Wolf's behavior, but the way he addressed her as young master. Previously, only she had the right to utter that word. Now she's been taken over by a new half-orc slave, and the young master is treating her so well. Catherine could only silently console herself. After all, it was all the young master's arrangement. Perhaps in a few years she would be able to enjoy this title all to herself again. She had heard and witnessed many such things in the large Joel family. As a servant, she naturally kept quiet, but the women in those cases rarely met a good end. Those who were lucky enough became maids to nobles, or even wives or concubines under their command. Those with bad luck might be beaten to death or even tortured to death, or thrown into the arena to fight against humans or monsters. However, she had watched Ethan grow up, so he probably wouldn't do anything cruel. But she wasn't sure, after all. She had seen far too many nobles who were two-faced and treacherous. I hope this usually gentle child won't do something like that. While she was still in a daze, Ethan and Wolf had already returned to the temporary house, and Catherine hurriedly followed. She now essentially takes on the role of housekeeper. After all, Marcus was already as busy as the consul, so she had to handle the servants' and young master's affairs herself, as the young master only trusted her. Thinking of this, she became happy again. Gaining the master's trust was the highest honor for a servant. Before long, Marcus also returned. He glanced at the orc next to the master, and although he was displeased, he could only remain calm. "Sir, the list of serfs you requested has been compiled, but many of their names are duplicated, so I can only assign them numbers." "Thanks a lot." Ethan took the thin sheets of paper. They represented a week's worth of Marcus's hard work. Compiling the resumes of over 500 people is quite difficult without assistance or organization. After all, the serfs' work couldn't stop, so the steward would have to work harder. Marcus's abilities are exceptional. He writes about the personalities, abilities, and experiences of over 500 people in a very concise and refined manner. Ethan's goal was to select some leaders from among the 500 serfs to share the burden with Marcus. After all, this was the only one under his command who could barely be considered an administrative talent. Marcus should focus his energy on more important matters rather than on the trivial matters between the serfs. "And those servants?" Ethan looked up and asked. "How well educated are those servants?" "He needs those attendants to contribute to the territory in their spare time from their cultivation." Marcus shook his head. "Of the 12 squires, only 5 are literate and only 2 have completed the church's formal education." Ethan sighed, realizing he had very few capable men under his command. "I've heard that Joe Chang enjoys reading, so let him teach the servants. Also, establish a system where the top 3 students in each day's knowledge assessment are rewarded with half a piece of dried meat. Even servants don't get to eat meat every day, so this reward must be quite tempting for them. As for Rasu and Afen, they are fully responsible for their training. I want to see a group of attendants who are qualified in terms of knowledge and combat ability in the shortest possible time. The first servant to complete the objective will receive an extra reward." Marcus accepted the order and left while Ethan still needed to study the list of 500 people. He wanted to select leaders from among the serfs and classify their status. These people must be honest and reliable, and each group must ensure that there are no relatives or friends protecting each other. The 500 people were divided into 25 groups, with each group leader reporting directly to Marcus, thus creating a 4-tiered operational system for the territory. Ethan, Marcus, serf leader, serf. Ethan's orders can also be communicated more quickly. Therefore, he didn't mind giving those leaders some small favors. He refused to believe it, even if all he was given were amateurish dances. Even in flight, there are different levels. There are always those that are slightly stronger. Their resumes were laid out before Ethan, and he could only carefully select those who were barely usable. After careful selection, Ethan narrowed it down to about 50 names. Most of them had similar experiences, and their only redeeming quality was their diligence and hard work. And they are not young, and they are quite skilled at farming, which is very important for territories where food is scarce. Most importantly, they have families, wives, and children. This means they have a weakness. Then came the field visit with Marcus and Wolf by his side, meeting with each of the serf candidates who had just been working in the fields. Ethan observed how they worked and their behavior in front of him, their master, and selected 25 team leaders. The next step was to group these serfs into groups, a task even more grueling than selecting candidates. Taking into account the interpersonal relationships among the serfs, and especially avoiding grouping a group of old acquaintances together, was a huge challenge for Ethan and Marcus. The two sat at the table in the hall, discussing the rules for the distribution. The wives and children of the team leaders were grouped together so they could focus on their work. As for the others, children over 14 years old were separated. In addition, each group should ideally consist of strangers except for married couples, so as not to give the serfs any room to rebel. Marcus nodded in agreement, surprised that this young lord had a method for managing serfs. The main responsibility of those group leaders is to oversee the production and minor matters of their group's fields, as well as to convey government orders. Most importantly, there's a system of collective punishment. If someone makes a mistake and is discovered, the entire group is punished. However, there's also a reward if the report is successful. The Lord truly governs his people skillfully. In this way, those lazy and foolish serfs will wholeheartedly contribute to the territory. Ethan ignored the perfectly timed flattery and continued, "To motivate them, we can give individual rewards to the teams that do well." Conversely, backwardness brings punishment, whether it's penal punishment or reduced rations. Those guys won't want to accept it. Marcus frowned. He had previously felt that the master was too kind to the serfs. The serfs, who could have survived on a piece of black bread and a bowl of thin porridge a day, were given 3 times that amount by the Lord. This would actually diminish the Lord's prestige among the serfs, which would be detrimental to his rule. He said, "Sir, excessive favoritism will only make those insects think you have no authority whatsoever. The treatment you have given them is already enough to make them grateful." Ethan stood up, his back to him, his hands behind his back. "Your vision is still too narrow. How's your math?" Marcus hurriedly stood up and said in a deep voice, "Sir, in this respect I am one of the top butlers in the family." "Then let me ask you, approximately how much would a piece of black bread and a bowl of porridge cost?" Marcus calculated for a moment, then replied, "About 3 copper coins. If it's our own grain, the cost can be halved." A group of 20 serfs means an extra cost of about 60 copper coins per day, or about 20 silver coins per year. Copper coins were a subordinate form of currency to copper coins, with an exchange rate of approximately 10 to 1. A group of serfs, at the very least, could cultivate 150 mu of land, producing approximately 4,000 kilograms of crops. If these serfs were willing to work harder for a small reward, even if it were just to increase the yield by 1%, that would still be 40 kilograms of wheat, worth 40 silver coins. Ethan had a faint smile on his lips. Although his butler was somewhat foolish and old-fashioned, he always thought of himself and the territory. Ethan wouldn't mind patiently explaining it to him. Marcus realized what he meant and thought of a word that nobles often used. Invest. Those nobles often boasted about how many properties and local specialties they had purchased and how much their prices would rise in the future. I've never heard of anyone investing in a group of serfs. Even if all that is given is a piece of black bread and a bowl of thin porridge. That's true. Apart from serfs, nobody else would value these things. After understanding Ethan's thoughts, he felt that this godforsaken place might be about to undergo some changes. "My lord is wise. No matter what, we've made a profit. At the very least, feeding them more grain will reduce the losses for the serfs." Ethan nodded. In his mind, it wasn't just about extracting more wealth. Instead, it is about establishing a new order in a new territory. This will allow the territory to develop faster so he can live better. Serfs are the foundation of a territory. Without them, the territory cannot function. Human life boils down to 4 words: food, clothing, shelter, and transportation. These are the common needs of everyone. Ethan was always cautious and frugal. His wealth was limited and he had no intention of squandering it. Before his territory becomes self-sufficient, he needs to find a way to make it wealthy. He looked up at the empty space where no windows had been installed yet. In this barren land, there was only a little bit of greenery. Abundant water sources and lush groves. Logs are not only excellent firewood but also important building materials. Traveling downstream along the Whitewood River that flows through the territory can even reduce a significant portion of transportation costs. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his hands behind his head, pondering his neighbors near Log Town. They couldn't possibly not know about a place as wonderful as Log Town. Marcus also reported to him that he had heard logging noises in the nearby woods. He's been here so long, and the neighbors haven't come to say hello yet. It seems they're testing the new lord. Based on Ethan's most malicious speculation about his stepmother, the entire Northwind region probably knows that a new knight has arrived in Log Town. It's even possible that they could be bribed to kill him. After thinking for a long time, Ethan sighed. In the end, it was inevitable that we would have to resort to violence. This is the first step for Log Town, the first hurdle it must overcome to survive. His neighbors nearby consisted of 6 knights backed by 2 barons, and his territory directly bordered that of one of them. Regardless of the circumstances, it is necessary to appropriately demonstrate military strength to the outside world. He only had 1 second-tier knight under his command, Rasu. Although, in theory, a mere baron is beyond the capacity of a second-tier knight. But Ethan never underestimated his opponents, especially the nobles who had managed to survive in this godforsaken place. Their strength cannot be overestimated. Aside from Rasu, the only other second-tier member in the territory is himself and Wolf, who cannot show his face. He wasn't yet capable of letting her appear in public. A second-tier beastman slave would inevitably cause trouble if word got out. 1 second-tier servant, 2 first-tier servants, and 6 qualified attendants. This force isn't particularly strong, but it's not weak either. But it's always good to intimidate the neighbors. Ethan didn't believe they would use their precious Tier 2 combat power for logging. Ethan wasn't going to sit down and discuss the matter with his neighbors. He wanted to fight first. Since they knew of my arrival but didn't take it seriously, they were deliberately testing me. Only a bloody retaliation can prove one's stance. While Ethan was planning his counterattack, the flying trio were gathered together discussing Rasu's changes. Ah Fen was the first to launch a denunciation against his former comrade. "Did you lick the master's dermatitis while we were away? How did you suddenly get promoted?" Joe continued, "What kind of potion did the master give you that actually allowed you to get promoted?" Faced with these accusations, Rasu abandoned his usual dejected demeanor and looked at his 2 good brothers opposite him with a faint smile. "After all, we're from 2 different worlds now, so there's nothing wrong with giving in to them." Despite this, the group has developed a fairly good relationship over the past few days. Therefore, he didn't put on airs and openly told the 2 the truth about his promotion. After listening, Afen and Joe fell silent. The 2 looked at each other and both saw disbelief in each other's eyes. "You mean the master just touched your head and you advanced to the second tier?" Rasu nodded obediently. "Are you sure the master didn't put a potion in your tea?" Rasu shook his head. He was certain it was just ordinary tea. The group looked at each other and finally came to a conclusion. That scoundrel Rasu got incredibly lucky. Then came the wailing of the 2. "I could also be the master's most loyal dog. I could also become a second-tier cultivator. Why did you old B********* D get there first?" After saying that, the 2 hugged each other and burst into tears. After venting their frustrations, the group regained their composure and began to discuss the master's intentions. After all, the master couldn't just promote them for nothing. Loyalty is just talk. It's all bullshit until you put it into action. Putting that aside, there's only one reason left. Rasu made a contribution. When pressed further, Rishu replied, "The master praised me for training the servants quite well." This answer alone clearly did not meet their expectations. Training their servants wasn't difficult for them, they just hadn't been as diligent as Rasu before. After some thought, Ah Fen came to a conclusion. Perhaps in the master's eyes, promotion isn't difficult for him. As long as we work hard, we can also get promoted. Considering his status as a good-for-nothing, this explanation might even be self-deceptive. But Joe was determined to prove it. He was willing to believe that this was probably a false claim just to find a reason for himself to live. "Then we'd better perform well for
Master."
The 3 exchanged determined glances before parting ways to continue their own work. Ethan was always very efficient. After a night of passion with Wolf, he convened a meeting in the morning. This small meeting, attended by only 17 people, can be considered the first military meeting in Log Town. 12 squires, 3 knights, and Marcus, the provisional governor of the territory, were summoned by Ethan to await the Lord's orders. At the round table carved from a huge log, Ethan sat in the main seat with only 3 knights and the governor qualified to sit with him. Even though the large table, which took 3 nights 3 days to build, could accommodate many people, the servants could only stand obediently behind the knights. The nobility has always maintained a clear distinction between social classes. Without any tedious small talk, Ethan got straight to the point. "It's been over a week, and our neighbors have not only not visited us, but they've also been trying to cut down the forests of Log Town and plunder our property as if nothing had happened. Do any of you have any opinions?" Rasu was the first to stand up. He was Ethan's staunch supporter. At the master's command, I immediately slaughtered them, leaving not a single one alive. Ah Fen and Joe muttered a curse at the old actor, then quickly declared their loyalty. We are willing to defend our territory to the death. Ethan gestured for them to sit down. Even though the information on the system panel convinced him of their abilities, this performance still pleased him. But he remained calm and said, I've never liked wasting time and energy on empty talk. As long as the result satisfies me, everyone will be rewarded. Marcus continued, those despicable thieves are wreaking havoc to the east of our territory, and the Lord desires that you bring them back alive. Bloodshed is acceptable if necessary.
Thief.
The word lingered in the minds of those present. It was a peculiar word. No one may hunt or cut down trees on his territory without the Lord's permission. Anyone who violates this consensus is a thief, and the Lord has the right to deal with him as he sees fit. Ethan's meaning was clear. Since this group hadn't revealed their noble status, they would pretend not to know and could kill them at will. Logtown is Ethan's territory, and no one is allowed to set foot there. Ethan stood up and glanced around at the eager knights and squires. He saw ferocity in the eyes of those servants. Fighting was their duty, not shoving mortar on a construction site. The eyes of the three flying figures revealed ambition. They longed to climb higher. Ethan's lips curled into a smile. I'll leave this matter entirely to the three knights. I'll await your good news in the territory. After a brief commotion, a dozen or so people set off in a grand procession, determined to reclaim their territory. Ethan, on the other hand, had to deal with matters concerning the serfs. After all, not only ordinary serfs but even the team leaders didn't quite understand their responsibilities. There was no other way. After the servants left, the few people in the territory who could temporarily serve as grassroots administrative staff were gone. All these chores fell to his shoulders. Today is the first day of the territory reform. He would rather give those serfs a rare day off than not make them understand what they were supposed to do. It took him and Marcus a long time to divide the serfs into groups and define the living areas for each group. He ordered all the serfs to memorize the issued decrees, and the foremen were required to recite them from memory on the spot. The foremen didn't understand the purpose of these regulations, but they were happy to receive a small piece of dried meat as a reward from the Lord. Just as the illiterate serfs were diligently memorizing the regulations, an unpleasant incident occurred in the woods east of Log Town. Ron knelt on the ground in humiliation, bound tightly with thick ropes that even a knight could not break free from. He shouted harshly, "You bastards, do you know who we are?" His confidant next to him also began to stammer as if trying to say something, but his mouth was gagged and he couldn't make a sound. Looking at the unmoved man before him and considering how easily they had captured everyone with such a small force, Ron couldn't help but feel a surge of anger. I'll give you rude bastards one more chance. Let us go and I can pretend this never happened. Ah Fen snorted and looked at Joe, who was compiling statistics. The two shrugged and reported the situation to Rasu. Although Ethan didn't say it explicitly, everyone knew that Rasu was the boss. The three of them gathered together to discuss the results of their work. 37 men, not one escaped. 30 were serfs, 2 overseers, 2 squires, and 1 knight. Looking at Ron, who was still barking incessantly, Rassel frowned. Let me teach him a lesson. Afen only gave one piece of advice: don't kill him. The master still has a use for him. The two of them stood there and watched the good show unfold. The towering Rasu stood before Ron, looking down at the pitiful knight who had been ganged up on by the three of them. Since when did stray dogs on the street have the right to bark on our territory? Ron's face flushed red and he shouted in his defense, do you know who's behind me? Behind me is... Pounce. His words were cut short. Before he could finish speaking, Rasu kicked him in the right cheek, sending him sprawling to the ground with a whimpering scream. The blow hurt, but it couldn't take a knight's life. Rasu crouched down, grabbed his hair and lifted him up, saying in a deep voice, a despicable thief has no right to defend himself. Await the judgment of our Lord. Ron's eyes widened. He was all too familiar with this method. He had done it many times himself. He was about to reveal his identity as a knight. Unfortunately, Rasu didn't give him the chance. A knight's squire stuffed a sour-smelling sock into his mouth. When Ethan finally finished his instruction of the serfs, he heard the cheers of the servants before he even had a sip of water. Ethan pushed Wolf away as she tried to get close, telling her to hide in the bedroom because he had important things to do. The wolf girl reluctantly returned to her bedroom. Just before closing the door, she pouted her little head out and pouted in dissatisfaction before gently closing the door behind her. Ethan felt he needed to teach her a lesson to prevent her from being too disrespectful. And the time would be tonight. Yes, I've been very busy all day, so it's normal that I only have free time in the evening. Now it's time to go see the neighbor I've dragged here. After enduring countless humiliations, Ron finally met the master of Log Town, an excessively young master. Ethan gestured to remove the sock from his mouth, and Ron, ignoring the foul-smelling saliva, began to wail. "Merciful sir, your knights have bound us without a word. This is an insult to the nobility." Ethan looked at the knight, who was drooling all over the ground, and felt a wave of disgust. This knight actually wanted to restrain himself using the rules of the nobility. "On what grounds? Just because I'm new?" he sneered. "There are no nobles among you. I only see a bunch of thieves stealing my property. Not executing you immediately is already my greatest mercy." Ron was desperate. He wasn't afraid of death, but he was unwilling to die with such a humiliating title. Knights only die on the battlefield. I have Baron Saul behind me. Spare my life." He yielded, betting that Baron Saul's name would intimidate the young man. "If I can stall for a while, less than a day, Baron Saul will come with his men and then I will be rescued." But there was no fear in Ethan's eyes. "How will you prove you're one of Baron Saul's men?" "I'm giving you only 1 hour. If your answer doesn't satisfy me, the people behind you will only get 37 corpses." Upon hearing this, not only Ron but even the two knights' squires were eager to prove themselves. Unfortunately, they were not qualified to speak in front of Ethan. Ron's expression shifted several times as if he was considering something. Ethan leaned down and whispered in his ear, "I'll give you time to think it over, and I'm willing to be a little lenient, but every 2 minutes one of your companions will die randomly. I hope you'll consider it carefully." Having said that, he stood up and prepared to leave. "You devil." His curse was not yet finished when Ethan's words drifted over again. "One person is dying every minute now." Ron finally shut his foul mouth and knelt on the ground without saying a word. Time passed slowly and every second felt incredibly long to Ron. It wasn't until 2 servants lifted him up and dragged him away, saying, "Don't dirty the master's hall." He didn't understand what this meant until he saw a similarly bound person in a newly paved dirt square. He must have been a serf in their territory. The serf's eyes were filled with fear and emptiness, and even more so, numbness. He didn't know why he was arrested while simply chopping down trees, but he recognized the person opposite him, a knight under the Lord's command. Immediately afterwards, a giant blade appeared above the serf's head. The job of executioner was fought over by the servants because they could get a sip of wine. "Even though I can't drink it, it's good to soothe my throat." The wine sprayed onto the giant blade slid down onto the numb and ignorant serfs. It was only then that he realized he was going to die. The elderly serf tried to ask the knight before him for help, but before he could utter a word, the giant blade had already fallen. A jet of blood sprayed all over Ron's body as he lowered his head. The servants covered their noses and endured the pain as they dragged the body away. Rassel approached Ron, 1 minute until the next one. Ron remained unmoved. Rasu had no intention of giving him a buffer, or rather, a chance to get used to it. Next up is Ron's squire. Before the execution, the servant was finally allowed to speak. He had witnessed firsthand how the serf died. "These unreasonable outsiders are more like barbarians from the border than they are. They will not show mercy to themselves." So in front of his servant, who was breaking down in tears, Ron finally decided to speak. "What do you want to know?" Rasu helped him up and brushed the dust off his clothes. Then, with a serious expression, he said, "We need everything here." Ethan poured him a cup of tea himself. "Oh dear, you should have said so earlier. If we had known you were our neighbor, we wouldn't have ended up fighting like this." Ethan smiled sincerely as if it really was a misunderstanding. Ron took the cup but didn't touch it, only saying in a deep voice, "I hope you'll keep your promise." "Let us leave after I've finished speaking, Sir Ethan." This indicates that he did indeed know a new lord had arrived in Log Town. and that it was highly likely that everyone in the area knew, which would be very advantageous for Ethan's next move. Ethan didn't answer directly but instead let him continue. Soon, Ethan produced a map of the Northwind region along with basic information on the various nobles. These were very useful for Ethan, who was new to the area. The border region is vast. Even in the relatively insignificant Northwind region of the Wasteland province, there is a viscount and 4 barons. As a knight, but with his fiefdom of Log Town being no less prestigious than that of an ordinary baron, it's conceivable that the noble territories here are larger than those of others. A larger territory means more resources, and more resources mean greater strength. This is an undeniable truth. Even though the land here is barren, it is still relatively rich in black soil compared to the heartland of the empire. Compared to the territory of the orcs, this is already excellent farmland. Ron's direct superior, Baron Saul, had a very powerful armed force. The population of over 2,000 included 500 militiamen who were occasionally trained, 100 armed soldiers, 20 squires, and 4 knights. This ratio is astonishingly high. The nobles in the heart of the empire would never do such a thing. It would be too much of a burden on their territorial finances. It would affect the quality of life of the noblemen. However, the advantage is that the baron's strength is already quite good in the North Wind region, but he still doesn't have a second tier. Ethan carefully examined Ron, who was standing in front of him, and found him to be not particularly strong. Even compared to the flying trio, they're not much better. No wonder he was relegated to such a trivial task as overseeing logging, and he only had 2 attendants. Roya couldn't possibly go toe-to-toe with Thor. He didn't have that many men. It seems the only option now is to approach it from a different angle. But regardless, he wanted others to know that the new Lord of Log Town was not someone to be trifled with. He gave the knight a reasonably good treatment, locking him in a room by himself and having a Fen and Sunday night watch over him. Ron considered himself unlucky, grateful to have escaped with his life, and now he could only wait for his master to come and save him. The others weren't so lucky. Ethan's territory was short-handed, so taking them to do manual labor was the best option. The key point is that they can also withhold food. In any case, apart from nobles, everyone else is nobody. Based on the distance between Log Town and Baron Thor's howling territory, he won't be able to come to redeem them until at least the day after tomorrow. Ethan needs to be prepared for a response. He looked at his palm. A tremendous force was trying to burst forth. He clenched his fist. The day he would break through was not far off. At that time we'll have a greater chance and more hope of surviving. His goal has always been clear. To survive in this godforsaken place. If possible, it would be even better if they could live a more comfortable life. Let's worry about tomorrow. What we need to do now is punish that slave who has shown me some disrespect. Ethan returned to his spacious bedroom where he found complete freedom from any disturbance. He lay down casually on the soft, large bed, and Wolf, seeing this, made him some tea. "Young master, would you like something to eat?" That was what I was thinking." Wolf's wolf ears twitched. "I'll go right now, ah." Ethan grabbed her arm and pulled her into his embrace. Wolf could clearly hear the young master's breathing, and her wolf ears began to tremble involuntarily. "You've been a bit naughty today. Are you ready to be punished?" But the laws of the territory don't have. My word is law. I have decided to administer the caning punishment to you." "Who, young master?" Wolf's eyes welled up with tears. She hadn't expected that the nobleman before her was about to begin those perverse tortures. Ethan chuckled. "Just kidding. I've decided not to eat dinner. I'll eat you first." Wolf's hands were grabbed and her mouth was ruthlessly gagged. As time went on, she gradually accepted this somewhat brutal punishment. And she gradually became addicted to it, and unbeknownst to her, her tail began to wag again. That's a sign of happiness. Ethan stared at the rising favorability rating and fell into deep thought. He admitted that he hadn't done this yesterday specifically to increase favorability. He was simply suppressing his feelings. If this would increase his favorability and make the territory skills provided by Wolf stronger, then he was willing to make this sacrifice. "Anyway, she's my wife." Wolf, still fast asleep, turned over, revealing faint silver-white runes on her snow-white neck. Ethan stared at the incantation that represented slavery. Only in front of his wife, whom he completely controlled, could he truly relax. Hopefully there will be a chance to remove this rune. The wolf girl made cute, soft purring sounds. Ethan didn't want to disturb his wife who had worked too hard the night before, so he left a kiss on her forehead and hurried away. He still has a lot to do. As the door closed, a smile appeared on the wolf girl's lips. This nobleman isn't the kind of pervert who enjoys torturing people. Surprisingly, she was gentle. As the Lord, Ethan was busier than he had imagined. After all, to survive here, being a hands-off manager was far from enough. He was responsible for overseeing the infrastructure development of the territory, the reform of the serfs' labor, and the training of the servants. Perhaps because of Rasu's example, Afen and Joe worked tirelessly to teach these servants, and any slackening would result in their criticism and insults. Upon seeing their lord arrive for an inspection, the two greeted him and then worked even harder to have their servants display their work. With this drive, the two of them will soon be promoted, something Ethan had already planned. As for the attendants, Ethan did not intend to use them all as full-time military officers. It's not good if educated people only know how to fight and kill all day long. Apart from a few talented individuals who were promoted tonight, the rest were all given the position of Marcus's administrative assistant. The best option is to bring them up when it's time to train the troops later. Therefore, their training time is less than their education time, and even if they are dissatisfied, the Lord's orders have absolute authority. Moreover, there are additional rewards for doing well in learning. Although he has now enacted laws for the serfs, there is simply no one to supervise them. Even if you break the rules, no one will know. The only thing we can guarantee right now is their progress in clearing the land. That's the most direct indicator. There are rewards for clearing land quickly and penalties for being slow. The team leaders discussed it and, based on their experience, decided to. There might be no rewards, but there would definitely be punishments. Even if it was just to avoid being hung up and whipped, they would still have to work hard at farming. To encourage them, Marcus checked their progress daily, and the best performing group received a bonus. This was the best reward for the often hungry serfs, not to mention that the extra meal was the standard for the servants, and it was much better than what they usually ate. As for the bad ones, he threatened them fiercely, saying he would remember them and settle the score together after the land reclamation was completed. The master would certainly be displeased if the serfs were unable to complete their targets due to injuries. Marcus understood perfectly that the young master's entrustment of a large portion of the territory's power to him might not be without the intention of making him the future governor. Although he wasn't particularly skilled in this area, he was still quite familiar with managing slaves, as he was currently only involved in that task. If things continue like this, he will at least become one of the most important figures in the territory. Before that, he had to complete the master's task properly. Feeding such a large group of people was no easy task, but the old man's method was indeed effective. The cultivated land increased day by day, and reaching the target before the end of the reclamation was a piece of cake. While he was overseeing the serfs, an uninvited guest arrived at the gates of his territory. At this time, the town of Log had no walls, only a temporary gate served as its facade. Baron Saul arrived in this rather desolate-looking territory with 3 of his men. The knight accompanying him couldn't help but laugh out loud. "My lord," he said, "look at them, they don't even have a fence. Do you think they'll survive 3 days when the orcs come?" Saul glanced at him. "Don't underestimate anyone, he's just arrived, he's not necessarily worse than us." "Put away your pride," Thor stopped at the gate. "At the border, everyone deserves respect, even if they were driven here. Sick, go in and announce their arrival." The knight nodded in agreement and stepped through the gate, trying to find someone he could talk to. Unfortunately, the first influential person he found was a young man who looked very young and was dressed in exquisite clothes. Sick politely asked the young man across from him, who looked like a nobleman, "Where is Lord Ethan Yor of Logtown?" Ethan patted him on the shoulder. "Take me to see your master." Sick was surprised that the new lord was so young and didn't even look like an adult, but he dared not show the slightest disrespect. Besides the fact that this was a nobleman from a prominent family, he sensed a dangerous aura emanating from the young man. The two groups sat down at the round table in the hall without any apparent hesitation until Catherine poured tea for everyone. The patient Baron Saul spoke first. "I'm truly sorry for the lateness of your visit. Please accept this small token of my appreciation." A subordinate pushed a small bag over, which Rasu took and examined to ensure there was no danger before handing it to the master. Ethan glanced at it, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "It's nothing. It was impolite of me not to visit the neighbors sooner. It's just that I'm always busy with matters on the territory and haven't had the time." It was just a polite remark. Under the golden glow of 10 gold coins, he could say it 10 times over, let alone just one. Thor chuckled and began to explain his purpose. "Some of our men have recently gone missing in your territory." Ethan immediately changed his tune, stating that he absolutely could not accept such an explanation. "Who is it? I didn't see anyone." Seeing his shameless behavior, the other knight couldn't contain himself and began to threaten him. "Don't talk nonsense. Ron disappeared on your territory." Thor covered his teacup with the lid. "Sir Ethan, please think carefully about whether this really happened." His tone was harsh, which made Ethan even more annoyed. He never acted like a coward. "I've never heard of any foreign knights in my territory." He still propped his head up with one hand, looking calm and composed. But Rasu beside him exuded an imposing aura, and a sense of oppression enveloped everyone. A layer of cold sweat beaded on Six's forehead. This young man's strength was not to be underestimated. Definitely second tier. But Thor remained confident. A second-tier opponent was still within his capabilities. Besides, he believed that this young man wouldn't break off relations with him. "I think you might be forgetful. Why don't you think about it some more?" He pushed a glittering gem toward him. "Without even looking, you can tell it's an energy essence. This stuff is a great thing for cultivation." Ethan then slapped his forehead, seemingly only now realizing what had happened. "Yes, yesterday a group of thieves came to steal my logs. Were they your men?" "Thank goodness you arrived in time, Saul, otherwise they would have been executed tomorrow." Ethan stood up and waved for Rasu to go and release the man. He shook hands with Saul like old friends. "From now on, we'll be good neighbors, helping each other out. Let's hope there are no misunderstandings." Thor didn't show any weakness on his face, but in his heart he was already cursing this little fox for setting a trap for him right from the start. What kind of mutual support between offense and defense? Logtown isn't qualified for that yet. Just wait and see. After taking away the pale-faced Ron and dozens of emaciated serfs, Thor immediately left this backward territory. "Temporarily halt all logging activities near Logtown. This land is his." Ron was shocked. He was still waiting for his master to avenge him. "What about the loss of territory?" "The land has a decent amount of timber, but let's not make this public. Let the young man's other neighbors find out more about him." After saying that, the tall man patted Ron on the shoulder. "It's just a minor setback, don't worry about it. We'll have a nice drink when we get back." Ron nodded, glancing back at Log Town with lingering fear. He had a premonition that, under the leadership of that young lord, that small place would not remain so backward. Back in Log Town, Ethan was playing with that tiny essence. This gift, or rather the ransom, demonstrates a great deal of sincerity. A Tier 1 energy essence is the essence of a Tier 1 monster and can help a Tier 1 knight make significant progress. This is a rather extravagant approach. Another method is to give it to the knight's squire to increase their chances of breaking through to the next level. I've used quite a few of these things before, so I know how good they are. The crystal-clear energy essence emitted a yellow light, indicating that it would be most effective on Earth attribute battle knights. None of the knights under Ethan's command possessed any elemental attributes in their fighting spirit. Ethan didn't intend to give it to them either. It would be a waste. He held this essence of energy in his hand and decided to give it to his best servants. He could rely on the flying trio for the time being, but he couldn't rely on them forever since their strength was really limited. "But we won't treat them unfairly. As for gold coins, they are accepted in all baronial territories in this region and in Northwind City, the Viscount of Northwind. The prices of goods will be higher since those merchants travel all the way to the border just to make more money. Most of the Baron's territories are towns, but Northwind City is a real city. To avoid getting ripped off, it's best to go to Northwind City." He has always found it difficult to negotiate deals with others, especially in the early days before he made a name for himself. The surrounding nobles were all watching him. Northwind City is separated from Log Town by a considerable amount of noble territory, making it somewhat troublesome to pass through if the two places are strangers. Therefore, the road to Beifeng City to buy grain is difficult to travel. Ethan had already made up his mind. Since it was difficult to buy food, he would simply rob it. However, no matter how rude the nobles on the border may be, they still maintain a certain facade. After all, they still need to unite when faced with an invasion by the orcs. If outright robbery doesn't work, then we'll have to find another way. His neighbors weren't just the Saul family. The town of Log had enough food for a month, and it was only the beginning of winter. Ethan didn't have much time, but enough to wait for his neighbors to bring him food. Those people certainly wouldn't let the opportunity to obtain high-quality timber pass them by. Therefore, Ethan specifically ordered his squires and knights not to go out but to stay in the territory and concentrate on training. So a week later, he had captured many of his neighbors' henchmen. For 3 consecutive days, 1 or 2 men and their serfs were arrested each day by Rasu's team, with only 2 who had tipped them off being released. According to their escaped men, at least 2 knights captured them. So these knights all decided to wait for the others to suffer. After Ethan had arrested all the neighboring serfs, the knights finally made their move. While Ethan gained hundreds of free laborers, he also received a joint letter of condemnation from them. The letter contained apologies for not informing him, the new lord, and a demand for his release. Ethan threw it into the fire without even finishing reading it. He wasn't afraid of such verbal threats. 6 knights are nothing. Even if they're all together, they can't turn the tide. The more than 300 serfs they contributed are now working hard on their own land. With no news arriving for a long time, the knights grew anxious. The serfs were also their valuable assets, and who knew what this new lord might do? Not long after, Ethan received a second letter. This time, they finally suggested a location to discuss the incident. Knights' disputes are generally not too serious. Even on the border, their territory will not exceed 2 farms. This is a size limited by population. They probably have fewer men than Ethan. The logging was not only for wintering but also for selling to other nobles. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the serfs Ethan had captured were their lifeline, so it's normal for them to feel angry when they gather together. Ethan sat quietly in his chair, waiting for them to finish their rant, his face expressionless, as if to say, "You say your piece, I'll listen to mine, and if all else fails, I'll just go home." Finally, someone could no longer contain their impatience and asked him, "What do you want in return for releasing our people?" Ethan held out his hand and made a 1 gesture. The man asked cautiously, 1 silver coin for 1 person. Ethan shook his head. 1 gold coin, that's impossible. A slave in Northwind City is worth no more than 20 silver coins. 1 serf in exchange for 100 pounds of grain, not even the high-grade wheat. Clearly, as a knightly family that had established itself on the border and passed down its traditions, they had a surplus of food. So the group sat down and began to discuss the feasibility of this condition. The final conclusion was that each person should weigh a maximum of 50 pounds, otherwise it wouldn't be worthwhile. Or we can wait until winter is over before redeeming them. Ethan said it was wishful thinking. There was no way to work in the border winter, and those serfs were just eating and drinking for free. If you don't redeem them now, all those people will be mine. These words undoubtedly struck a nerve with everyone, as these serfs were their foundation. It might take the hard work of 1 patriarch to grow a family of knights to add a few hundred slaves to their household. This kind of loss is unacceptable to them. Amidst the tense atmosphere, someone suggested, in that case, let's handle it like a border dispute. The so-called border approach is very simple. Regardless of right or wrong, regardless of status, regardless of the size of the matter. If you fight, the winner gets to decide. Ethan looked up at the 6 knights who had stood up before him, their auras surging. "You are not qualified to lay a hand on me." After saying that, he stood up and walked behind the flying trio. "Sir, is it just the 3 of us?" Ah Fen pointed to himself, while Joe next to him bobbed his Adam's apple, clearly lacking confidence in himself. Ethan patted them on the shoulders with both hands. "All right, you've been enhanced, get going." An inexplicable power erupted in their chests, and the dormant fighting spirit seeds that had been dormant for many years began to sprout and develop into seedlings. At that moment, they knew that Rasu had not lied. They are no longer ordinary trash but second-order flying beings. Although I'm still a noob, I now have the skills to dominate. The result is obvious. Without risking everything, 6 Tier 1 units against 3 Tier 2 units is simply suicide. Not long after, they collapse to the ground, screaming in agony. Not surrendering outright already shows remarkable courage. Ethan crouched down and said bluntly, "Stop pretending with me, let's go back and prepare the food." Having said that, he led his men and left. Several tall, burly men from the north stopped screaming, stood up and dusted themselves off. "What should we do? This new lord is far too powerful. We can't really give him that much grain, can we? Those logs wouldn't fetch that much." After a brief discussion, the group realized they couldn't handle the newcomer themselves, but others might be able to. So they set their sights on Baron Saul, hoping he would mediate on their behalf. After all, this price is simply too high. In the main hall of Log Town, the hall has now been fitted with simple windows. Ethan and Thor looked at each other without saying a word. After a long silence, Ethan spoke first. "Did they send you?" Saul nodded, observing Ethan's reaction. "How do you plan to resolve this?" Saul threw the question back at him. "How do you plan to solve this?" Ethan took a sip of tea and said meaningfully, "I need food. That price is too high, they won't agree. How about 60 pounds? September 1st. I don't lack food. 82, that's the most I can offer. If it's not good enough, I'll go to war with them." Thor smiled. He knew this newly formed territory had absolutely no war potential, but he still gave the young man some face. "I think 80 pounds is a reasonable price. Any higher and they might as well look for other options. I want more than just ransom." Saul stood up. "I'll persuade them." Ethan extended his hand to him. "It's been a pleasure doing business with you, Baron Saul." Another much larger hand gripped his tightly. "I hope you can stay here, Sir Ethan." 80 pounds, that was the price for every serf. Servants paid twice that. The food provided by releasing the hostages this time is enough to feed the entire town of Log for more than half a month. 80 pounds is also the price they charge for logging. 3 logs for 80 pounds of grain, a very good deal. This price might buy the same weight of firewood, but it certainly won't be as good quality as logs. If they were willing to put in the effort to transport it to Northwind City, they might even be able to make a profit. Baron Saul takes a cut, with the 20% fee considered a contribution to his reputation as an intermediary. This didn't come without a price. He promised to provide the young man with some technical assistance. Carpenters and stonemasons and an old farmer who has spent his whole life farming in the North Wind region. These men were sent to Ethan's territory, ostensibly to help with construction. In fact, Saul's order to them was not to return until they had trained a few apprentices. After all, Ethan still had to pay them wages at market rates, and the Lord would tax that money. Ultimately, however, it was Saul who suffered the loss, bearing the pressure on his reputation. After all, he had vouched for Ethan and helped him build his territory. The tall, imposing middle-aged knight patted Ethan hard on the back, his enthusiasm surprising him. "These guys are useless on my territory anyway, so I'll just send them here to eat and drink for free. You don't mind, do you?" This is a decent investment for a new territory. Ethan remembers this kindness. Ethan's deeds had already spread among the noble circles, and everyone was trying to guess his character and style based on his actions. A month later, Ethan received an invitation from Baron Hoffman, one of his neighbor's superiors. An invitation to a noble ball signifies that the local nobility acknowledges his presence. Regardless, having 3 second-tier knights is a sign of great potential. High-level military force determines the upper limit of a territory, especially when there are multiple second-tier forces, which allows for a great deal of action. There are no more than 10 second-tier knights in the entire North Wind region. With the exception of Baron Thor, most of the other barons maintained a second-tier status, which was the limit they could support. The time limit for clearing the territory had long passed, and the results this time were less than satisfactory. Even with the added disadvantages of being unfamiliar with the land, having outdated technology and lacking time, the land reclaimed by the serfs was enough to feed them. This is good news for Ethan, as he can't live off selling logs forever. Ethan rested his head on the girl's firm thighs, the warm and soft touch giving his mind complete relaxation. I cleared my mind and thought for a long time, but it seemed like something was missing. Until his unclean hand touched something furry, a wagging tail. Without any mercy, he pulled it over and sucked it in hard, feeling as if he had been elevated. Completely oblivious to the girl's flushed face, Ethan pinched her cheek. You seem shy on the surface, but you're probably enjoying it very much inside. Wolf turned her head to the side. No, not at all. Ethan was delighted to see his favorability rating rise. This cheap wife is quite arrogant. He got up and pinned Wolf down. Saying one thing and meaning another isn't a good habit. Wolf continued to avoid his gaze, but her hands were already wrapped around his neck. Clearly, she believed the young master wanted it again. I can't today, I need to prepare for the dance in a few days. Upon hearing this, a fleeting look of disappointment crossed Wolf's eyes, followed by worry. This is the young master's first time receiving an invitation here. He must be extremely careful. Ethan stroked the girl's long, white hair, feeling delighted by this spontaneous act of kindness. It's just a pity that I can't take you out right now. Wolf shook her head. It's all right, young master, I don't like being in the sun. Life is good enough for me now. Aren't you illiterate? How can you use such a sentence? Miss Catherine taught me very well, and I learned very quickly. That's not what I meant. A long silence fell over the atmosphere. The languages of the orcs and the Empire were very different. Never mind. Ethan rubbed her ear. I won't dwell on your past, you can talk about it when you're ready. Ethan extinguished the oil lamp. Under the cover of darkness, Ethan could feel the girl's heartbeat beside him gradually steady. She truly breathed a sigh of relief. Before falling asleep, Ethan's thoughts were simple. How could an ordinary beast tribe possibly produce a second-tier beastman, especially one who is not even an heir? The system is not wrong. This wife, who is completely obedient to him and seemingly weak, could at least beat 2 Rishus in a fight. Wolf Riders, one of the orcs' elite units. A terrifying creature that only the Empire's heavy cavalry could confront on the front lines. At this moment, the girl lying peacefully beside Ethan, fast asleep with one arm tucked in her arms, is this legendary being. If possible, Ethan would be happy to take her to some high society social events. Unfortunately, he can't yet. He's not strong enough. He would not put his loved ones in danger without being fully prepared, especially on the borders where hostility towards the orcs exists. This group might give themselves face and allow themselves a place, but they would never allow an orc to appear openly in their gathering. Even his own wife wouldn't do. He mentioned this subtly during his conversation with Saul. Judging by the speed at which gossip spreads, most of the Empire knows that Ethan, the former heir of the Yol family in the Gale province, married a beastman slave as his wife. Even if he doesn't say it, others will just assume that he has dealt with the orc. This is exactly what a nobleman who prides himself on his moral integrity should do. Even so, a nobleman could only have one principal wife in his lifetime, and Ethan's political potential had been exhausted. Let it go if he's exhausted. He has no use becoming someone else's son-in-law anyway. On the day of the ball, Ethan met a significant number of nobles from the Northwind region, along with their family members. The appearance of this handsome young man surprised Hoffman's butler, who had no idea which family's young master he was. Just as Ethan was about to be forced to hand over the invitation, Saul burst into laughter to greet his partner. As usual, the tall man patted Ethan on the shoulder and introduced him to the others. This young man is the new lord of Log Town, Knight Ethan. Salute to our new friend. Everyone raised their glasses, and in the ensuing commotion, Ethan could only casually accept a glass from a nearby waiter to celebrate with them. After the introductions, Thor led him to a corner where they could easily observe the lively crowd. The dance hadn't even started yet, but someone had already spontaneously started singing. What's your impression of us? It was their 3rd meeting, yet they were already talking like old friends. You guys are all so tall, each one of you is a rare find in central Taiwan. He had previously thought it was an exception, but now it seemed that the nobles on the border were generally frighteningly wealthy. 1.9 meters is considered short, 2 meters is the norm, and they are all muscular like bodybuilders. Only the strongest are qualified to inherit titles. This has been a truth since ancient times. But your delicate features might win the hearts of many young girls. Sorry. Realizing he had misspoke, he waved his hand, telling Ethan not to take it to heart. Ethan understood what he meant. Someone might be trying to use this as an excuse to make trouble. Women are useless. Your own strength is the only truth, not just for show. The two men clinked their glasses. Looking forward to your performance, Knight Ethan. Hoffman, this Baron, fits all of Ethan's stereotypes of frontier nobles, tall, strong, and extremely unrestrained. This ball was not only to introduce Ethan to everyone, but also to serve as the final negotiation before the orc invasion. After all, this was a matter of life and death, and everyone listened very carefully. Hoffman relayed the rumors he had heard from Viscount Northwind. This year's harvest is good, and the intensity of the invasion will be slightly weaker than in previous years. At least the larger tribes won't intervene, and the smaller tribes should continue as before. As for the demons, they are unlikely to make any moves in the next few years. This is good news for Ethan, as the first year is often the most difficult. Perhaps it was because of the arrival of new people. Hoffman spoke very carefully about the rules during the orc invasions, and Ethan listened attentively. Generally speaking, when attacked, one can seek help from nearby lords, and the lords cannot refuse if they have the capacity. The reward after the mission is accomplished should be acceptable to both parties. In general, mutual assistance is a consistent practice among the border nobles, but just then an untimely voice appeared. Does this new short guy have the ability to help us? We don't want to end up siding with him alone. All eyes turned to Ethan. Ethan didn't want to pay attention to this ridiculous provocation, but the silent crowd made their stance clear. Show us your strength. They need to find out more about this young man. Ethan looked at the man who had spoken rudely and slowly stood up. Let's go by the border rules. I can give you one hand, you be ****D. That's a typical frontier talk, Hoffman muttered. This man was naturally someone he had arranged just to gauge Ethan's strength. The strength displayed by both him and his subordinates reveals a great deal. Baron Hoffman's hall was large enough to accommodate a duel between two people. The crowd stood behind the two of them in perfect unison, surrounding them. The border region has always been martial, and young people and girls alike admire those who possess martial prowess. They recognized the knight opposite Ethan. He was a seasoned veteran knight. Ethan's remarks had displeased them greatly. They felt that the man was too arrogant, disdainful of others, and didn't take the border warriors seriously. The contest began quickly. The knight, seeing Ethan place his left hand behind his back, couldn't help but remark, "Are you serious? You're not even worthy of my underhanded tactics." The man got into a fighting stance and launched an attack, sending a powerful punch straight at Ethan's face. Ethan was not afraid at all and immediately threw a punch with his right hand. "You little brat, do you think this is still the central region?" Hoffman knew at a glance that Ethan was absolutely. The disadvantage is that the size difference between the two sides is too large, and even their wingspans are not in the same league. When two fists collide, the one with the longer arm span will definitely have the advantage. The result was beyond his expectations. The knight took a few steps back, his hand trembling slightly, unable to clench his fist any longer. Ethan, on the other hand, stood there as if nothing had happened and even asked with concern, "Are you all right? Do you want to continue?" The man gritted his teeth, clenched his fist with his other hand, and charged at Ethan again. Unfortunately, bravery cannot change anything. The end result was that he was punched so hard he was sent flying backwards and couldn't get up again. Throughout the entire ordeal, Ethan's left hand remained behind his back. This victory earned him cheers and goodwill from the crowd. The strong naturally receive adoration. Hoffman frowned. He couldn't understand this guy's stance and attack methods. Even if it's a second-tier opponent fighting a first-tier opponent, the difference in strength shouldn't be this terrifying. After all, the main improvement is in fighting spirit, while the enhancement of physical fitness is not significant. But ultimately, this tactic earned him his respect. After this farce, the ball began. Even if Ethan tries to hide in a corner, a constant stream of young women and ladies will find him and invite him to dance. Besides his heroic performance, his outstanding appearance also won people's hearts. His black hair and black eyes further signify that he possesses the purest noble bloodline. Compared to the burly, rugged man, the fair-skinned and beautiful Ethan was a better and fresher choice. After all, on the border, every nobleman's son wanted to become a big guy. Like the bold and forthright men of the border region, the women here are also very straightforward, wealthy, and generous. Do you have a wife? I'm already married. The girl left dejectedly, and Ethan put away his awkward yet polite smile. This was the third noble lady to ask him. It must be said that the women of the North were quite attractive in their youth if it weren't for the fact that some of the older ladies had waists thicker than Ethan's thighs. Ethan was happy to form a brief friendship with them. He considered himself a responsible man. He couldn't possibly act like a scumbag. Even though he turned down many people, he still received many invitations to dance together. His skillful dance moves and elegant speech captivated many young girls. Only then could he feel that he was a nobleman who had grown up in an earl's family, an heir who had once been highly regarded. Instead of a small landowner who wanders the wasteland every day worrying about the barren land. His perspective was shaped by his circumstances. He began to miss the corrupt days of the nobility. He will return someday, and he will not be a mere pioneering knight then. Saul approached his longtime friend. Most families that have survived to this day are related by blood or marriage, and he and Homan were old friends. Let this kid steal the spotlight. Homan sighed, unable to understand or comprehend the young man before him. He doesn't look like an illegitimate child. Homan looked at Saul, whose previous speculation was that Ethan was probably the illegitimate son of the old earl of the Joel family and had been exiled here. He looks like a proper central nobleman, and he's very well educated. Their thoughts drifted to the distant province of Gale, where news was scarce for them. Only Ethan himself knew the specific details. Could it be an internal family struggle? Thor offered a new perspective. That kid suffered countless humiliations, arriving here practically penniless, yet he brought 3 second-tier subordinates with him. Someone doesn't want him dead. It's best to ignore this kind of person. Don't get yourself into trouble. In a few years, someone will probably call him back. Hoffman chose to wait and see. The long days at the border had instilled in him a leisurely and unhurried nature. He had no desire to associate with the second son of a nobleman who might only be staying for a few years. Saul disagreed. What if he settles down here? With his power, I think we should be calling him a baron in no more than 5 years. We can talk about it later. I can afford to wait. Providing help in times of need is 100 times better than adding flowers to brocade. How do you know he's not an ingrate? Nobles love gossip, and as a result they remember many interesting rumors very clearly, to the point that they are wary of them. The two clinked glasses, drank their wine in one gulp, and then parted ways. The ball was the time for the nobles to conduct their negotiations. As barons, they were the second highest rank of nobility in the Northwind region, and naturally they had to unite all allies and subordinates before the crisis arrived. As the hub of each small alliance, they must take into account the situation and opinions of every member. But this time, Saul decided to take it upon himself to bring Ethan into the group. Ethan had just finished dancing with a young girl, and at the end, the girl with long blonde hair praised him. "You danced so well. It is my honor to dance with such a beautiful lady as you." Just as they were getting into the mood, the girl closed her eyes and leaned closer, waiting for a deep kiss. But Ethan felt a gaze on his back, so he placed his finger on the girl's lips. "Sorry, let's dance together again next time." The girl wasn't annoyed. Before turning to leave, she blew him a kiss, and Ethan reciprocated. "You seem to have a lot of luck with women. Would you like me to introduce you to some?" In response to Saul's teasing, he was quite blunt. "I have no plans to have an extramarital affair." I doubt even noblewomen in the central part of the empire would object to such a thing, let alone here. "If we stay discreet, no one will know." Ethan shook his head, rejecting the tempting offer. "You must have something to tell me, just say it, don't waste everyone's time." Thor smiled. This unpretentious young man was becoming more and more to his liking. "Regarding the orc invasion, you must have read a lot of information beforehand, but I imagine you're still unsure, aren't you? What do you want?" "I'd like you to join one of our small alliances. Then, everything you want to know will be answered." It sounded very tempting, and seemed like an offer Ethan couldn't refuse. Did the others in this alliance agree to my joining, or is this just your arbitrary decision? "I will persuade them." A very familiar reply, as if the person in front of him held absolute authority among his friends. "What do I need to give in return?" You don't need anything, just be willing to send a few of your men on a trip when necessary. The meaning is quite clear at this point. Thor's small alliance lacks high-end combat power. Even a single Tier 2 fighter would be enough for him to compete for, let alone 3. He was willing to pay a negligible price for this. Those allies, I suppose they're my neighbors. In that case, I'll join them, but we can discuss the details when we get back. The two parted ways, and Ethan watched him chatting happily with the other nobles. Before they knew it, the ball was coming to an end, and Baron Homan prepared guest rooms for all the guests who couldn't make it back. This was the first time Ethan had ever slept in a genuine frontier-style king-size bed. It's not as soft as the ones at home, and it seems like something's missing. A young woman who often stayed by his side, listening to his complaints about the many troubles on his territory. His wife, an indescribable emotion filled his mind, an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. Miss, he began to doubt himself. His wife was someone he had been forced to live with for a few months. Could it be that I've really developed feelings for him? With this feeling in his heart, he forced himself to sleep, thinking, I'll get up early tomorrow and head back. In the Lord's bedroom in Log Town, Wolf curled up carefully. This was the first night she had spent without Ethan by her side. She felt a strong sense of unease, and it seemed that Ethan wouldn't be coming back today. She had long known that her safety was provided by Ethan. This owner has shown unexpected patience and gentleness towards me. She had grown accustomed to the peaceful life in her territory and did not want to return to the chaotic and uncertain days. Therefore she prayed, please come back safely. Thank you for your care, but I have many things to worry about on my territory, so I must return early. Hoffman shook hands with Ethan, somewhat bewildered. There were still at least 2 hours until sunrise at the border, but the young man before him was already preparing to go back. If it weren't for the politeness of personally delivering the food, he could have slept for a few more hours and waited for the guests to finish breakfast before leaving. Braving the cold wind and darkness with the stars overhead for company, Ethan and his knights began their return journey. Several men rode side by side on horseback, and even the knights with excellent eyesight dared not ride too fast in the darkness. Sir, is something wrong in the territory? Why are you in such a hurry to return? I'm afraid something might go wrong in my territory. In silence, the group arrived at Log Town. Upon seeing the familiar town, Ethan breathed a sigh of relief. His own home was always the safest place. The important thing is that there are people at home waiting for me. You've all worked hard, go back and rest now. The servants can train later. Ethan dismounted and walked home with some eagerness. The closer he got, the faster he walked. Finally, he started running and roughly picked up Wolf, who was waiting at the door around the waist. Wolf gasped and shyly pressed her head against his chest. Young master, why are you so agitated? Ethan's words were tinged with barely concealed joy. I knew you were waiting for me. Wolf wanted to say that it was only right, but she swallowed the words back. She sensed that the young master's condition was somewhat unusual today. Wolf closed her eyes, and after a sleepless night she began to enjoy the warm embrace. But the young master's familiar scent was mixed with many other smells. Ethan, holding his wife in his arms, wanted to get a good night's sleep since he hadn't slept well the night before. But a remark from Wolf made him nervous. Young master smells of many different women. Ethan was terrified, like a husband caught cheating by his wife. Although the two are indeed husband and wife, he swallowed hard and asked with an unprecedented level of caution, would you mind? He looked at Wolf, whose eyes were still tightly closed, trying to get a response that would put him at ease. Of course not. After all, I'd be overjoyed if someone could help the young master relieve his stress. Ethan breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed he had passed this hurdle. He didn't know why, even though he had always been the one in absolute power. But I was actually a little nervous facing Wolf today. Just as he was getting ready for a good night's sleep, Wolf opened his eyes. Her eyes, as clear and bright as rubies, were filled with resentment. Is this the answer you wanted, young master? Ethan, already feeling guilty, finally couldn't hold back and reassured her in a coaxing tone, don't worry, I didn't touch them. I just danced with them. A faint smile appeared on the girl's lips as she kissed him on the lips for the first time. Okay, go to sleep now. This coaxing tone, like that used to soothe a child, did not calm Ethan down. I like you.
Yeah.
Wolf paused for a moment, her mind racing as she considered how to handle the situation. Her tail began to wag rhythmically again and the furry touch brushed against Ethan's body, making him feel itchy. Ultimately, she chose to trust her body's judgment. She could no longer live without her husband. I like you. A wisp of white smoke rose from Wolf's head. She had used up all her mental capacity to say those words. This satisfactory answer pleased Ethan. Judging from her demeanor, it didn't seem fake. This means that their forced marriage had a foundation of some emotional connection. After an unknown amount of time, their excited emotions finally subsided. Wolf asked, "Were the noble ladies at the ball beautiful?" "Very good, but not as pretty as you." "Then I imagine the young master must be really bored." Although it was only the first time they expressed their feelings, the couple had already mastered the art of romantic gestures. Catherine stood outside the door of the master's bedroom. It's already afternoon and the young master still hasn't gotten up. Marcus has a mountain of things to deal with, but no matter what, listening to the sounds inside, she couldn't bring herself to knock. Let the young master rest for a day. The child I raised has finally grown up. It's just tough on Marcus. Wolf's favorability rating increased from 59 favorability to 75 like. I like you and you like me. Territory skill, Loyal Wolf Guard gains a new stat, Born Warrior. The effect is a 300% increase in training efficiency for all territory warriors. Ethan stared at the skills displayed on the panel and fell silent. He hadn't expected such a divine skill to be given to him so easily. He patted Wolf's head. "Thanks to you." The wolf girl looked up. "What's wrong, young master?" "It's all right, you can continue." Wolf lowered her head again. When evening came, Ethan stretched and emerged from his room, feeling refreshed. Behind him was his wife, who was already fast asleep. Wolf's skills found a new use and his plans could be slightly altered to pursue greater profits. Time is his greatest enemy and also what he needs most. He didn't want to train the serfs at this time since short-term training would be of little use. Moreover, winter will only increase the consumption of food. His original plan was to begin organizing his own armed forces next year. Now it seems that those serfs might still be of some use as they can be considered as adding an extra layer of security to the territory. In addition, he wanted to know how effective this skill would be for Rasu and his servants. The training of the attendants has been unsatisfactory. Apart from 2 or 3 who are reasonably talented, the rest are not even up to the level of armed soldiers. This group of people were ultimately not up to the task, and he had already mentally relegated them to the ranks of grassroots administrative staff. Looking at the pile of documents in the study and Marcus waiting patiently, Ethan knew it would be another sleepless night. Before he could even settle in, Thor's messenger arrived in Log Town. 2 days later, their little alliance's gathering will be held. Such a tight deadline clearly shows that they don't have much time left. Before leaving, the messenger specifically told him to arrive early, but he had no idea what that Thor was up to. Before that, however, he needed to make sure his servants were in place. He didn't want his territory to become unmanageable without him. November in the north is already very cold. The bleak winds can easily blow away the lightly dressed serfs, and more people often die at this time than when it snows. During the winter, the Lord guaranteed food and firewood. Although we weren't very well fed, not very warmly dressed, and only had enough firewood for half a night, we managed to get through it. But not now, they still have to work. The newly cultivated land still needed their careful maintenance, even though Marcus had them use a system called shift work to reduce everyone's working hours. Yet people still fell ill, something even Ethan couldn't do. All he could do was provide them with enough firewood and enough food to fill their stomachs. As for clothes, Ethan simply couldn't find the time to buy them. The cloth he brought had already been distributed, and the serfs would naturally find ways to mix dried hay into it. Reclaimed wasteland always needs to be maintained, and Ethan abandoned the idea of training them after conducting a field survey. They were too weak and had too much work to do. Even if they train for half a month, they will at most not reach the level of the militia, and food will also be a major problem. Ethan sighed. This winter would truly depend on others to get through. This feeling was very unpleasant, but he had to endure it. Once winter was over, he could naturally train a usable team. The serfs' enthusiasm for production has recently declined significantly, partly due to the weather and partly due to inadequate supervision. Although the reward mechanism is very tempting, some people eventually give up after failing to receive the rewards. Ethan certainly didn't want to see this happen. Therefore, he established a system of supervision and whistleblowing. He officially appointed 9 lackluster servants as Marcus's assistants, reporting directly to Marcus. Those responsible for inspection and supervision will be held accountable for any instances of slacking off or other violations, as always. Of course, we also welcome reports from others or from members of the group. The former receives the reward, the latter receives the whip. The method of awarding prizes has also been changed. To encourage a sense of collective responsibility, all members of the award-winning group will benefit. The expenses have increased a bit, but I think Marcus will figure something out. The 9 servants were quite pleased with themselves, believing they had received a promotion from their lord. Little did Ethan know that, in his eyes, these unarmed men who were only slightly stronger than militiamen did not deserve the treatment of servants. That was personally taught by several second-tier knights. The remaining 3, while not exactly geniuses, all have a chance to advance to the first rank and become unranked knights under Ethan. Once the log territory develops in the future, there will naturally be opportunities to receive rewards and become a glorious border noble. After arranging these matters, Marcus's pressure was greatly reduced. After all, those 9 assistants also had law enforcement authority and would only seek Marcus's help in the event of a major incident. Ethan, on the other hand, finally experienced the relaxed lifestyle of the nobility. Setting aside everything else and indulging in the unique luxury and extravagance of the aristocracy was a rare experience for him. He used to slack off in the family like that, but now he carries the future of more than 500 people on his shoulders. Such days were naturally short-lived. The next morning, he set off for Baron Saul's territory, Howling Territory. As its name suggests, this is the first line of defense against the Orcish invasion, the northernmost border of the empire. The harshness of the environment is unimaginable, yet Baron Corsal's family managed to establish themselves in this windswept territory, honing their skills in battles against the orcs. The distance between Log Town and Howling Territory is not far, but the change in climate is enough to indicate that they have arrived in a new environment. When Ethan arrived, the tall knight was doing his morning exercises. It must be said that even among the border nobles who are all muscle giants, he is outstanding. Ethan estimated that he was at least 2.2 meters tall, and his weight was even more astonishing. Ethan even began to doubt whether he could successfully father a child. The Saul family's butler led him to the arena and then left, leaving Ethan to admire the border combat techniques alone. Thor's punches were wide and powerful, fast and precise, and his muscles, covered in fat, possessed immense power. Ethan doubted that he, at the first rank, could defeat Rasu, a second-rank disgrace, with just his physical strength. No wonder he survived here. Ethan felt even more respect for the nobles here. Their fighting prowess alone was something those pampered fellows in the Central Plains could never match. Thor, wiping his sweat, approached Ethan. "Good morning, Ethan. Want me to see your workout routine?" Ethan wasn't the type to strip naked in front of others and show off his strength. He shrugged and declined the offer. "I don't usually rely on exercise to improve myself." "Oh, what's that?" "Cultivating battle chi."
Secret.
He couldn't very well say that Miss Wolf had squeezed him too hard last night and that he almost couldn't get up today. There was no other way. She'd already called him husband, so if I didn't try harder, wouldn't that prove I was incompetent? Men are not allowed to say no, especially at home. After finishing their morning exercise, the two began their conversation while enjoying the cool morning breeze. The orc invasion, based on experience, only small tribes will attack this year, but just in case, I'll tell you the whole story. The attacks by small tribes are not large-scale. They often disperse to attack our farms and barns, and their strength is not particularly great. Often, only a few dozen militiamen along with a few experienced knights and their retinues were enough to hold them off. They never lingered in battle. Saul took a deep drag on his tobacco, a strong kind that was very popular among them. Large tribes are much more troublesome. They are massive in scale and are not afraid of sacrifice or encirclement. It often takes many arduous battles to defend the city to defeat them. An attack that doesn't even involve the main force would require the combined strength of at least 2 barons plus several, or even a dozen, knights to overcome this obstacle. Even the sacrifice of nobles is permitted if necessary. The last attack of this scale was 5 years ago, and the next one won't be far off. This year's harvest is very good. It should be enough for the orcs to eat. Why are they still attacking? Thor gave a meaningful smile. This is internal strife among the orcs. The large tribes don't allow their subordinate smaller tribes time and opportunity to develop. Considering the next half of autumn and winter, we'll face at least dozens of small-scale attacks before things get really bad. Let's prepare slowly. He patted Ethan on the shoulder, indicating that he would discuss the rest in the afternoon. This small alliance wasn't large. Besides Baron Saul, there were only 3 knights, and coincidentally they were all neighbors he had extorted. Fortunately, the group recognized their inferior skills and did not attempt to take advantage of the situation. These private gatherings are very casual. The group chats like old friends, asking each other about their lives. Although Ethan's previous interactions with them as a newcomer weren't pleasant, they tacitly accepted his joining with Saul's strong support. The border nobles value strength above all else, and they have witnessed Ethan's performance firsthand. He is a young man with great potential and impeccable strength. Even though his territory remained barren and backward, they were still willing to trust Ethan. Listening to their conversation, Ethan gained a general understanding of their situation. The border region has a strong martial spirit, and almost every free man joins militia training. Even serfs sometimes join, so it can be said that the entire population is a soldier. Each knight typically had 20 or 30 regular armed soldiers. Soldiers who are fully off-duty place an extremely heavy burden on the territory, yet their existence is unavoidable. They discussed dealing with the orcs on the surface, seemingly nonchalant, but in reality they were worried about what might happen. The Empire divides its regular soldiers into 5 ranks from lowest to highest. Conscripts, militia, armed soldiers, veterans, and the Empire's most prized ultimate unit, the Imperial Heavy Infantry. Conscripted soldiers were essentially serfs temporarily recruited. They not only lacked armor, but their weapons were at most farm tools such as pitchforks or hoes, making them virtually incapable of fighting. This system was prevalent in other parts of the Empire since it required no payment. But the situation is different at the border. Here, losing a battle really means death. The people mentioned here specifically refer to nobles or knights. Militia were soldiers who received occasional training, mostly free men with a few serfs. They brought their own armor and weapons, which were occasionally distributed by the lord. Armed soldiers are full-time, professional soldiers supported by their lords. They are often personally trained by knights and possess a certain level of martial arts skills and organization. As for what equipment to use, that depends entirely on the lord's skill. Veterans are a special group. They may not be stronger than armed soldiers, but they certainly have rich battlefield experience. They often hold a certain position in the Lord's army and are used as junior officers. Heavy infantry were a source of pride for all lords. Equipped with full heavy armor, they possessed exceptional combat prowess, and often only 3 to 5 men were enough to kill a knight. Ethan estimated that even on the border, those qualified to become such monsters were extremely rare. That means, including Ethan, we have a total of 180 armed soldiers, tasked with guarding 4 territories and patrolling, along with 26 veterans and 10 knights available for deployment. Upon hearing this, everyone present frowned. Our forces are already stretched thin. With the addition of Wood Town, there's a high possibility that our defenses will be breached. Ethan wasn't going to discuss that first. He was more interested in knowing the intensity of the orcs' attack. Based on past experience, how many people do they typically have in a single attack, and what is their strength? A knight picked up the thread. The attack patterns of small orc tribes are difficult to predict. Generally, they launch surprise attacks in small teams of about 30 people. Sometimes, they even coordinate several teams to attack multiple targets simultaneously, making them extremely difficult to defend against. Each team has at least a few high-level combatants, equivalent to heavy infantry, to act as breachers. The rest, though poorly equipped, are not much weaker than professional soldiers. That does make things complicated, since our people, in addition to patrolling, also have to guard important granaries and villages. The knight added they move swiftly, often ending a battle within 20 minutes. Whether successful or not, they immediately flee, giving us no time to pursue. Which tribes have we come into contact with? Saul pulled a bottle of spirits from the cupboard. In this harsh land, nobles often preferred alcohol to tea. After pouring a large glass for several people, he began to speak. Foxes, hyenas, even rabbits, cattle, and the like, almost anything is possible. The opponents are unpredictable. There are few nobles on the border, but many of their orc neighbors. There were so many that even Thor couldn't count how many tribes he had encountered. Many tribes tend to disappear after a short period of activity. This is an age-old experience. But I can tell you about last year's competitors, which may offer some insight. Ethan asked curiously, have you ever encountered wolves? Thor shook his head. There are many wolf tribes, but at least it's a large tribe. And in our vicinity, there's only one large tribe that's been around for over 100 years controlling this area. Maybe there are others elsewhere. Why are you asking? Nothing much, I just really want to see the legendary wolf riders. Thor glanced at him. Believe me, you don't want to face a guy like that. 25 years ago, Northwind City was completely plundered by a band of wolf riders who appeared out of nowhere. Every able-bodied man in the city went to the battlefield, and they all died. Another knight chimed in. The corpse of the previous Viscount Northwind was fed to the dire wolves in front of everyone in town. It was a nightmare for almost everyone. How many of them are there? Less than 30, all of them, including both humans and wolves, are at least tier 2. In the end, it was a heavily armed infantry force that the Viscount had kept hidden for many years that protected the castle, preventing this ancient family from being wiped out on the border. Thor swallowed a mouthful of strong liquor. This was a tragedy that would enrage everyone on the border, not to mention that the wolf riders had never returned, making revenge impossible. Ethan's heart sank. Is that large tribe nearby also this powerful? Thor shook his head. That bull tribe is very strong, much stronger than us, but they were helpless against that wolf rider force. Before, they relied solely on a few second-tier warriors in the tribe. Now that Ethan has arrived, we have a greater say in their affairs. Judging from their tone, it seemed that everyone had previously been intimidated by the bull tribe and lacked confidence in gaining the upper hand. Do you know the specifics of that Minotaur tribe? Thor exhaled a puff of white smoke. This guy is at least equivalent to the combined strength of 4 barons from the Northwind region, and his combat power is far superior to our warriors. But don't worry, unless the harvest is so bad that they can't survive, the major tribes won't intervene. Thor comforted Ethan, and in doing so, he comforted himself. In previous years, they were almost unable to resist the attacks of the wild bull tribe and could only obediently give up their land and food. It was a feeling of despair. The meeting ended amidst the participants' sighs of relief. They hope to see each other again next year, then we can enjoy a peaceful 6 months. The horses in the north are very large, but their numbers on the border are extremely low, and those delicate calves struggle to survive in this impoverished land. Therefore, even knights could not acquire a warhorse. The price was too high for minor lords to afford. The horses that Rasu and his companions rode were barely usable. They were only slightly faster than second-tier knights, nothing more. And this was the only way they could pass on messages and report situations. This was a right reserved only for knights and some veterans. If the attacked area had no horses, the entire army might have perished without anyone even knowing they had been attacked. The training he had previously considered putting on hold may need to be restarted. Among the matters they discussed, the armed patrol soldiers were of paramount importance. They needed to be not only flexible enough but also have a certain level of combat capability. They all knew who the right people were, but they could only put together a dozen or so teams to carry out the task. It's obvious that having so few people patrolling all 4 territories will create significant loopholes. Ethan didn't want to entrust his life to outsiders. If all their territories were under attack, whom would they help? Once this happens, even Ethan has no right to criticize them. Therefore, he needed to build up his own power base. He needs to find a good person to help him. He went to Howling Territory alone, leaving all his men behind to prevent any trouble in the territory. When he returned home in the evening breeze, he was greeted at the door by his attentive personal maid and his eagerly awaiting new wife. Watching the two embracing each other, Catherine's usually calm face showed a hint of helplessness. The orc girl and the young master suddenly became quite close. Well, as long as the young master is happy, let's just consider it a rehearsal for the future mistress. Today, Wolf personally cooked a roast chicken for Ethan. Wolf's cooking is excellent. This chicken was roasted perfectly with a beautiful color, aroma, and flavor that made it very appetizing. Where did you learn to cook? Wolf said with a grin, although this is the only dish I know how to make, it's one of my specialties. Give it a try. Suddenly, she leaned close to Ethan's ear and whispered, does the young master want to eat me first again? Ethan resisted the urge to teach her a lesson. After all, his back couldn't withstand the continuous high-intensity exercise. He had no choice but to grab her wagging tail and gently squeeze it, and Wolf lost her strength and collapsed into Ethan's arms. That's really bad. Ethan tore off a chicken leg and shoved it into her mouth. Make sure you finish your food. Wolf gave a vague reply, watching Ethan begin to eat. After everything was finished, the two lay comfortably in bed. Ethan was too exhausted to play any more games with her and instead said very seriously, which tribe did you belong to before? Wolf tucked herself into the blanket, leaving only half her head sticking out. After confirming that Ethan was serious, she slowly uttered a single word, Wolf. That's it. Wolf shook her head. It's a very simple name, yet it also exudes an ancient feel. There's a common practice that works in magical worlds or other cultivation or fantasy worlds. That is, the older the era, the stronger it becomes. Wolf tribe? That sounds impressive. He had previously known very little about the beastmen and had no impression of them whatsoever. So, you wouldn't raise wolves, would you? Wolf looked lonely. It's dead. There's no need to ask any further. Wolf is indeed a wolf rider, a figure capable of conquering battlefields. It's just missing a dire wolf. But that's not the point right now, Ethan said, grabbing her hand. Do you remember how the elders of the tribe taught you? Ethan phrased it tactfully, but Wolf understood what he meant. Wolves are born warriors, but the experience of their elders is crucial, and I understand that a little bit about it. So you're well aware of how the orcs plunder and exploit you.
Right.
Wolf was too embarrassed to admit that she learned her roasting skills by begging for food, so she simply said, I do know a little about the process, which should be helpful to you, young master. Ethan rubbed her ear, muttering, I need you to train those lazy bones. Your way. His tone carried a hint of guilt. Even now, Wolf's existence could not be revealed. The territory hasn't been developed yet and no one has established a foothold in Log Town. Ethan still has absolute control. But after that, it became difficult to conceal Wolf's existence. Let's hide as long as we can. I'm glad it helps the young master. My method will allow them to survive in this wilderness if they can endure it. She still looked as frail as ever, but Ethan could sense a change in her aura. A hint of danger lurked within his keen insight. If you give me a dire wolf, I can protect the entire territory by myself. She seemed to be joking, but Ethan didn't think it was fake. There's much more hidden behind this wife. But the young master doesn't like me showing my face in public, and I don't want to go back to the battlefield. She gently rubbed her cheek against Ethan's arm. The peaceful and serene days here were the most tranquil time of her life. Good night, young master. The following day, Ethan fell silent as he looked at the training instructions written by Wolf in broken imperial script. Even he, who was known for his rigorous training, felt it was a bit too harsh. The serfs definitely couldn't handle it. Once the land has been cleared, there won't be as many serfs to maintain. Ethan can try selecting a group of them to give it a shot. He summoned all the serfs and briefly explained the matter. The master has decided to conscript a group of serfs for militia training. Those who wish to participate can sign up. At this point, the serfs below the stage remained expressionless. They had no idea what was going to happen. Marcus, feeling somewhat embarrassed, unleashed his ultimate weapon. Anyone participating in militia training will have unlimited meals every day. These words caused an uproar among the serfs. In their view, the best thing in the world is to have enough to eat. As for the dangers of being a militia member, wouldn't farming guarantee survival against starvation? They are quite shrewd in this regard. After excluding women, the elderly, and those who were too thin or too old, only a little over 100 people remained standing, all of them able-bodied laborers from each household. To entice them further, Ethan added a rule. For every person selected from the group would receive an extra loaf of bread. Although it wasn't much, it was enough for them to rack their brains for. Rasu took the notebook handed to him by the master, which was said to contain training methods suitable for the border that the master had obtained from elsewhere. The notes on the paper were clearly not the master's. As a nobleman, he wouldn't scribble or alter simple words, some even had pinyin annotations. At this point, we can only believe these obscure and difficult-to-understand words. After all, he doesn't know how to train an army. To be precise, almost none of the knights trained armies. He'd be perfect for teaching knight squires. After all, you can teach them slowly, and that's how he got started. He could train an army, but he didn't even know what the training program was. The master's instructions were to first select a group of serfs who were physically fit, preferably no fewer than 20 people. Log Town was very small, and they had no granaries in the wilderness. This strength, combined with the knights, is enough to protect the territory. He looked down at the notebook and silently recited in his mind. The first rule is to keep them in neat rows and standing still. Rasu frowned as he looked at the chaotic scene on the sand. It was indeed a terrible sight. Everyone quiet. The restless crowd immediately quieted down, standing still and awaiting the knight's judgment. Rasu was pleased with their fear, but his demands went beyond that. There are 117 of you in total. Line up in 5 rows. Serfs had no concept of lining up, even if they were quick-witted and intelligent young people. Before long, the crowd began to descend into chaos, and the unrest was irreversible. People were confused about where they should stand, and as the crowd moved along, no one stepped forward to be at the front. Rasu's patience was limited, and it wasn't long before he took matters into his own hands and subdued the group of foolish serfs. He selected 5 of the taller serfs and had the others line up in a row with them at the front. Even with this goal in mind, it took a long time for the restless crowd to gradually quiet down. They were just standing there, leaning precariously. Rasu demonstrated the standing posture as described in his notes and instructed the serfs to learn it carefully. It was a tedious process. Those guys always liked to slack off when Rasu couldn't see them, and Rasu had to correct their posture mistakes one by one. Rasu, who was always a nice guy, finally couldn't stand it anymore and severely punished one of them with 2 lashes. Regardless of whether the remaining people regret it or not, as long as Rasu doesn't speak, they will continue to stand there. If there is any relaxation, the fate of the companion lying on the ground groaning in pain will be the same. The posture described in the notebook wasn't difficult, it just required some effort to maintain, and holding it for too long would cause numbness in the body. Generally speaking, some people will want to quit after 3 hours. Under the bright sunlight, it wasn't long before some of the serfs couldn't hold on any longer and began to sway. But he dared not shout. The knight's whip was not to be trifled with. Rasu's eyes showed disappointment. These guys were already among the strongest of the serfs, young and energetic. Unfortunately, people started collapsing within half an hour. Their stamina was simply too poor. Rasu called for men to drag him away. This was completely different from what was written in the book. After 2 hours, everyone collapsed to the ground, unable to hold on any longer. In that case, let's keep the people who can last an hour. In the blink of an eye, the team was down to just over 60 people. They had intended to withdraw, but Rasu gave them a reward. More than 60 people took off their heavy clothes and sat on the ground, munching on jerky without restraint, completely unconcerned that their dirty hands and sweat would stain their food. The reward will be even better if you keep going. That one sentence made them willingly stay. Are you kidding me? You can just stand around and get some meat. Isn't that better than toiling away in the fields? Just as they were gearing up for their next project, Rasu's orders surprised them. Stand in 5 rows and maintain your standing posture. Amidst the chaos, someone became confused and the 2 people beside him had already left. Fortunately, someone volunteered to be at the front, which gave them a goal. Even so, it took 5 minutes to stand properly. Some of you will continue to drop out. I need you to regroup as quickly as possible. If you're this slow next time, you'll all be punished. This time they performed slightly better, holding on for longer before giving up. It could be because of eating meat, but Rasu gave them a chance to relax. Everyone runs 5 laps around the sand. The first 3 to finish get a meat treat and the last 5 are punished. Long hours of physical labor may have taken their toll, but they are quite good at running, which is why Rasu looks a little better. Incidentally, even the last few were only punished by standing for a little longer. Secondly, train their obedience. Rasu didn't quite understand this concept of obedience. From his understanding, it probably meant making them listen to him. The best approach is to have them constantly turn, crouch, lie down, or do whatever else they want, basically execute commands. Thus, the serfs suffered yet another torment. A few days later, only about 30 serfs remained, more than expected but still within the territory's capacity. They have become able to assemble very quickly and their physical fitness is improving rapidly. In just a few days, it felt like they had been training for half a month. That night, before going to bed, Ethan specifically asked Wolf how they had performed. To be honest, it exceeded my expectations. Their frail bodies seemed like completely different people during training. The results were almost as good as our tribes. Will this really work? Ethan remained skeptical. Could this kind of training, so similar to military drills, really produce any combat effectiveness? If they train like this for a month, their combat effectiveness will be about the same as the militia. And their organization will completely outclass those temporarily assembled free people. Therefore, their performance should be stronger. Wolf had already revealed her identity to Ethan, and the words of a wolf rider are always credible. But they haven't even learned a single move yet. Don't you believe me, young master? Wolf's red pupils began to glow with a wronged red light again. How could that be? I'm just worried that those guys might learn too slowly. Having successfully feigned helplessness, the wolf girl leaned her head close to Ethan's. As payment for your distrust, you can't run away today. I never ran away. I've just not been feeling well these past few days. Stubborn Ethan tried to fool Wolf with his poor acting but ultimately failed miserably. In the past 2 days he discovered a tragic fact: he was not as strong as her. Quack. This woman beat Ethan to his knees. She must be going to take him back and make him her slave. Under the strongman's control, Ethan had no choice but to obediently surrender. This gave him even more motivation to become stronger. The training went even more smoothly than expected. A month later, Ethan faced a well-organized and disciplined team. They guarantee to absolutely execute the orders of their superiors. A born warrior, that's truly a divine skill. This kind of training speed is unheard of, not only in this small place but even in the central region. Although their combat ability is not great, their obedience and loyalty are guaranteed. Ethan fed them well during this time, and many of them became noticeably more muscular. The only drawback is weapons and equipment, which is an issue that no lord can avoid when trying to develop. Therefore, he had no choice but to swallow his pride and seek help from Saul. Blacksmiths, being core talents of the territory, are not suitable for Ethan's use. Moreover, there are no iron mines in Log Town. The only thing he can do is to buy equipment that has been phased out by Howling Territory at high prices. After polishing and maintenance, it's barely usable. There were 35 people in total, and he spent a hefty 20 gold coins on them. Weapons and equipment were extremely valuable these days, so he could only offer a price that Thor couldn't refuse. Snow began to fall from the sky, melting into desolate streams that soaked the ground. This is the signal that the looting has begun. The serfs before them, or rather the warriors, stood tall and proud, awaiting their lord's inspection. Knight Rasu has already told you about the Orcish invasion. Are you afraid? His response was a resounding shout: don't be afraid. Once you get through this, you'll be the first free citizens of Log Town and you'll be free. The soldiers looked at each other, somewhat bewildered. Seeing that they didn't even know what it meant, Ethan had no choice but to explain it to them simply. Once you become free citizens, you will no longer be my slaves, and I will even pay you a monthly salary. Although it may not be of much use now, it will come in handy later. Only after that was said did they realize what was happening. Sir, do you mean like the residents of those cities? You'll find out later. Having said that, he turned back and instructed Rasu to direct the movement of this small force. Marcus, following behind him, couldn't help but say, "Sir, the territory's food supply is already so tight it's affecting the finances. Promoting them to free citizens will only hinder the territory's development." 35 soldiers, which can be divided into 5 squads. Other noble families follow a similar system. Logtown was extremely poor. We had no base of operations in the wilderness, and I even had to stop logging. "Do you think if you were a beastman you would come and plunder us?" Marcus pondered for a moment and said, "But what if they don't give up and insist on invading us? This is our stronghold. If they fight us head-on, they'll know what's what. After all, compared to us, those nobles who own farms and ranches outside and whom we are more familiar with are the real pushovers. Wouldn't the militia's efforts have been wasted after they fought once?" Ethan stopped and answered the question in a calm tone. "The rule at the border is that all nobles must cease all fighting during an invasion, even those with grudges, otherwise they will be attacked by the entire community. This is indeed the rule that everyone agrees on." Marcus sighed. He knew what the master was up to. This former family heir was never a meek or weak fellow, and he saw it clearly. From a young age, Marcus knew that this was a person who was kind to his own people but harbored the deepest malice towards others, even those who were not his enemies. "Master, it's true that all the losses from the orc invasion will be attributed to the orcs, but if we are discovered then. If anyone hears you saying that, that's your problem. When did I ever say I was going to rob our neighbors?" Marcus fell silent. He simply couldn't fathom his master's thoughts. "Don't worry, our only enemy is the orcs." Ethan patted him on the shoulder, telling him to go about his business. In the study, Wolf, who was looking up words in the dictionary, sat down beside him. "How's the plan you've prepared, young master?" "It's troublesome, it's dangerous, and to be honest, even if I succeed, I won't gain much benefit." Only his wife, to whom he had entrusted his heart and soul, was someone he could completely trust. "We can take it slow, there's plenty of time. Once we get through this crisis, things will be much easier from now on. If we're slow on one step, we'll be slow on every step. If this keeps up, those guys will be dead before I even get back." The girl gently stroked his head, trying to comfort him. "I don't particularly like war, what about you?" Wolf's eyes dimmed. "I hate war, I loathe fighting, and I don't want to lose my home. If I hadn't met Ethan, my life would have been ruined."
Yeah.
Ethan embraced her slender waist with a hint of regret. Like her thighs, it felt firm and strong to the touch. Fortunately, his original plan didn't require Wolf to intervene. He only needed to put on a good show. "War is dangerous, so I don't want you to get involved. That's why I dislike war. Those I cherish will be caught up in it, but it's a necessary means." Wolf threw herself into his arms and whispered in his ear, "I'm willing to raise a new wolf." The snow outside started falling heavily. On the very edge of the borderlands, on the very edge of howling territory, a group of orcs, bundled in thick clothing and carrying crude weapons, gathered together. Judging from their appearance, they are a group of hyenas, officially known as hyena people in the Empire. This is a beast race that is very different from wolf. Aside from having a humanoid shape, its head is exactly the same as that of a typical hyena, and even its hands and feet have animalistic features. Their leader was an exceptionally tall hyena man with hands that were completely human-shaped. He slowly began, "It's snowing, it's time for us to make our move. What's the intelligence we've gathered?" A short hyena-like man stepped forward. "I saw that Baron Saul's farm from afar, the grain piled high in an entire warehouse and the guards were sparse." The tall man smiled cruelly. "Those pleasure-seeking flying creatures, if it weren't for the prior agreement, how could they have lived this long? We've kicked off the entire looting season. Are you all confident?" He was met with a low growl. The entire group began to head towards the farm, which was lit by firelight in the darkness, silent and stealthy yet deadly enough. Winter always arrives suddenly on the border, sweeping across the land like a gust of wind. Before long, experienced citizens had become accustomed to not being able to open their doors the next day or hearing the shouts of knights and orcs at night. This year is no exception. A vanguard of the orcs arrived at the farms of howling territory. In the pitch-black snowy night, the hyena men with their keen hearing could easily pick up the snoring coming from inside. The farm had several dogs, but unfortunately their throats were slit before they could even sound an alarm. Based on experience, people on the farm would huddle together in one room to keep warm and sleep. Therefore, as long as they kick open the gate in front of them and slaughter them, they will have plenty of time to take all the grain from this farm back. The ruthless nature surging in the hyena's bloodline fueled the leader's fantasies. Those frail peasants cried and begged for mercy under his own knife, but he would first kill all their friends and relatives before their very eyes. It's a pity we can't just burn the farm down, we'll have to come back next year. Then he kicked open the not-so-thick wooden door. In the pitch-black environment he saw three tall figures. Thor and his two knights had been standing there waiting for quite some time. Do you have a few real brothers? 3. Zai, is it possible to reconcile? Are you joking right now? The three men's fighting spirit surged, and they propelled their longswords with enhanced strength and well-trained bodies. This warrior, who could fight an imperial heavy infantryman to a standstill without needing armor, died so easily. Several hyenas tried to rush forward to avenge their leader but were killed by the experienced knight with a few sword strikes. The others sensed danger and tried to turn and run, but it was too late. The well-prepared professional soldiers had surrounded them, making escape impossible. Thor swung his longsword, splattering the blood on it. The towering knight now resembled the Grim Reaper, delivering the news of death to the remaining orcs. Today, you are the prey. In less than 20 minutes, blood stained the black and white earth, seeping into the soil. Next year's harvest should be good. After cleaning up the battlefield, Thor relaxed his furrowed brow. It was a fruitful year, even though 2 of my own unfortunate soldiers had died, the compensation meant nothing. What matters is genuine military merit. The Empire imposed severe restrictions on titles of nobility. Apart from nobles who held the authority to open up new frontiers, other nobles needed military merit to advance in rank. But the Empire hasn't fought a war in many years. Therefore, the only way for minor nobles to advance in rank is to kill members of other races. As long as you kill enough enemies, theoretically you should have no problem being promoted to duke. 31 ordinary alien soldiers and 1 minor alien leader, totaling 36 military merits. Thor only needs to keep the heads of these dead people. Once winter is over, the imperial scribes of Northwind City will record them. Thor did the math in his head. Through the efforts of 4 generations of his family had risen to the rank of Baron during his father's time. Currently, he is still far from achieving his goal of being promoted to Viscount, 10,000 military merits. Perhaps it will be my grandson's turn. Solside then rallied his spirits. Even if it was just for his unborn grandson, he would do his best. It's a pity that his son lacked talent in cultivation, and his talent in martial arts was also pitifully poor. Before his descendants can produce someone capable of shouldering the responsibility, he must support this family and this territory. If not, he would exchange all the military merits he had accumulated over the years for imperial gold coins, give up his title, and return to the central region to become a wealthy man. That's a pretty good option. But this victory was only the beginning of the plundering. The great warriors that those alien races spoke of had not yet appeared. A single high-ranking warrior or leader is worth 20 military merits, but it's difficult to retain them. Their fighting prowess is second to none. It often takes multiple knights to severely wound them before they can be killed. Such opportunities were few and far between throughout Thor's long reign as Lord, and he had only killed one such person. This attack has only just begun. A failed probe is nothing to the orcs, they are always very patient. He ordered several veterans to go to the other lords and deliver the news of the invasion's commencement so that they could prepare. After suffering a setback, the orcs will not focus their efforts on the same target and are very likely to bypass Thor's territory to attack them. Even though no large tribes participated this time, it is still very dangerous for many small tribes to unite. After receiving the message, Ethan saw the messenger off and let out a sigh of relief. This day has finally come. Even with preparations made, all humans experience fear when faced with unknown dangers. Of the 3 knights who accompanied him, 2 had already gone out to patrol all the territories of the Alliance, leaving only Rasu to guard him. Have the soldiers reduce their patrol area and divide into 2 shifts for night watch, 3 teams during the day and 4 teams at night. Do your best to defend. Ethan's approach was simple: retreat. After all, he didn't have any family business to protect. Preserving this small piece of land was all he needed to do. Even though those guys couldn't stand it and wanted to burn down his farmland, Ethan chose to stand by and watch. Fields can be replanted, but people are hard to find once they're gone. Moreover, the potatoes that the sorcerer had improved in the fields had not yet grown in winter and could not be harvested until the following spring. Thor had predicted the orcs' actions. As expected, they bypassed Howling territory and attacked other territories. Those knights weren't particularly strong. Not only did they suffer heavy losses, but they were also rescued by Thor and Ethan's knights. But for some reason, Logtown has not been attacked yet. Ethan is still waiting for them. Perhaps Logtown was not in their knowledge. In their minds, this area should only be a desolate ruin. There is at most one large river that does not freeze. But if they don't come looking for Ethan, Ethan will come looking for them. The orcs never attack any territory during the day, no matter how weak or vulnerable that territory may be. They knew that their tracks could not be concealed on the snow-covered land. This, in turn, gave Ethan an opportunity. The two knights, Afen and Joe, were not only on patrol but also searching for traces of the orcs. The news spread quickly and a brand new camp was set up at the border of several nearby lords' lands. It was indeed arrogant and consistent with the haughty nature of the orcs. The prolonged invasions have led to a strange tacit understanding between the two sides. The border nobles only need to defend and minimize their own casualties. The orcs, on the other hand, can plunder with impunity. It's all because the power imbalance between the two sides is too great. The tragedy in Northwind City back then is the best example. Faced with an absolute difference in quality, even the cities painstakingly built by successive viscounts are extremely vulnerable. Since ancient times, the beastmen have been trying to invade human territory and slaughter prey across the border as hunters. That's the kind of opponent we're facing now. I know you have fear in your hearts. After all, just a month ago you were farmers toiling in the soil for a living, but now it's different. You are warriors with weapons in your hands. Your training is no worse than that of those crude orcs, and you are human. When you coordinate your efforts, you become a cohesive unit, and they are no match for you. No matter how terrifying the legendary beastmen may be, you must remember that they are still humans. A person dies when they are killed. For the sake of your good days in the territory, come back alive. After the brief speech, everyone began to eat their last meal before leaving, large loaves of bread with borscht. Borscht is a thick soup made by stewing onions, potatoes, tomatoes, or other vegetables with meat. It can also be called a mixed stew. Fresh vegetables were undoubtedly precious at this time, and in order to feed the 28 soldiers who were going on this expedition, Ethan went to great lengths, directly killing a valuable pig from his territory. Everyone finished eating with a happy smile on their face. They had never dreamed they would be able to eat so well just a month ago. Their only wish was to have enough to eat, but Ethan had already given them this extraordinary treatment. It was their turn to pledge their loyalty. Ethan watched as the loyalty level on the panel steadily increased, eventually averaging around 70. This level is already quite high, considering that when he first took over, the average loyalty of the serfs was less than 30. And now they are just one step away from becoming die-hard fans, to become a free citizen. They themselves don't know how good this treatment is, but one day they will learn from the envious looks of others what a great honor it is. Freedom has always been an unattainable thing. Only those who have possessed it know what it feels like. Seeing that everyone had eaten and drunk their fill, Ethan stood up and looked at them. Everyone immediately stood up, heads held high, looking at the Lord before them. Actually, the kitchen made more than this. We left half for you to eat when you come back tonight. After this job is done, you'll still get this kind of treatment. Rasu directed them to assemble at the town gate, while Ethan would personally lead the team this time. In front of Catherine and Marcus, Ethan solemnly handed over all responsibilities of the territory to his wife. After I leave, the territory will be yours. Be careful, and if there's any danger, it's best to leave immediately. Don't worry, young master, I will protect the territory. The two people beside him were completely stunned, but they never disobeyed the master's decisions. Moreover, their years of experience in judging people and situations allowed them to see the danger hidden beneath the girl's serene smile. Ethan trusted her completely with the territory. This former wolf rider had recently sharpened a knife. Although it's not the most suitable one, it's still quite convenient to use. The heavens granted them good weather. It didn't snow all day, and the warm midday sun was slowly melting the snow on the ground. Although the road became much more difficult to travel as a result, it also made it easier to discern directions. The orcs had more than one camp, and to prevent them from raising any possible alarms, Ethan needed to kill these ugly creatures as quickly as possible. This time, their target wasn't the hyena people but a race called the snow deer people. This creature is tall and has antlers on its head. Looking at its enormous deer head is sure to trigger the uncanny valley effect. However, it also has its advantages. Its combat strength is not particularly strong, and most importantly, it is not particularly fierce. Ethan's biggest fear was that the enemy's ferocity would terrify these greenhorns. Therefore, this consideration also applies to the swift and decisive action. Before long, Ah Fen and Joe, who were on patrol outside, received the message and came over. "What's the situation at this camp, under the worst-case scenario?" Ah Fen said, "Sir, from our observation, a camp can only have a maximum of 3 squad leaders at a time, with 2 to 3 small teams stationed there simultaneously. The rest of the men are probably out transporting supplies. Let's talk about the camp's layout. From our observation, they have no defensive measures other than setting up tents. They haven't even built a fence. Although they lack defensive capabilities, it will be difficult for us to annihilate them completely. Whether we can escape or not, we'll only know after the fight. Even if they tip us off, we can always run back to our territory. The grain is still here." Just as Ethan had anticipated, when the orcs saw a group of humans approaching them, they couldn't help but sneer and show disdain. They quickly assembled, eager to see what this trembling human force was up to. "Is everyone here?" Ethan asked. Although curious as to how the human before him could speak the common language of the beastmen, the leader instinctively answered yes. The next instant, he saw 4 extremely fast figures rushing towards him. "He is a warrior." The moment the idea popped into his head, his perspective shifted. From the sky to falling, then I saw a familiar figure. It was my own body. Ethan overestimated their vigilance. The camp was only guarded by a small leader and a small squad. Although a small squad of 30 people was no match for the slaughter carried out by the 4 second-tier knights. The 4 knights surrounded the remaining 8 men, watching them tremble without doing anything. Ethan asked in his newly learned animal language, "Do you want to live?" No border noble had ever asked the orcs this question before. It wasn't just a matter of language barriers. The relationship between the two sides had always been one where the orcs looked down on the humans. Ethan saw longing in their eyes. So he generously declared that if they could break through the square formation of spears formed by the soldiers in front of them, they would survive. The snow deer men exchanged glances, then charged forward with unwavering courage towards the spear formation. The end result was that these inexperienced recruits vomited repeatedly. Ethan didn't give them time to adjust. He simply ordered them to quickly move the food from the camp. There were also spoils plundered by the snow deer people. The box was half full of coins. There were no gold coins and very few silver coins. Most of them were copper coins and some copper coins. They probably robbed some unlucky knight of his belongings. Ethan didn't care what he got. "Sir, something terrible has happened. There are marks on this grain. Please take a look." Ethan had no idea that the food contained such unimaginable traces. "Northwind City ham." Several words were printed on the ham. He looked up at the 3 knights beside him. If they weren't his trusted men, he would have killed them to silence them. "Don't tell anyone what's going on here. Luckily, my soldiers are all illiterate now." The others nodded in agreement. Ethan's meaning couldn't be clearer. "Then, sir, what should we do?" "There's no such thing as a free lunch. Take it all back. There was plenty of grain here." Tons of wheat and smoked meat were piled up together, and it took the group 3 trips to move almost all of it. The surplus grain could feed more slaves, which should have been a good thing. But Ethan would rather not have taken the operation himself. The Viscount of Northwind City is the strongest power in this region. Although there are no Tier 3 beings, his army is strong and well-equipped with many loyal nobles under his command. Theoretically, I am also under his control. Theoretically, it's the most comfortable place to cross the border. How could someone with such a superior status possibly collude with the beastmen? Ethan sensed a conspiracy. In order to uncover the truth, Ethan risked his life to reach Thor's territory, hoping to obtain some information from him. Do you think there's a possibility that the border nobles are colluding with the orcs? How could you ask such a question? Thor looked at the young man before him with great care. At this moment, a joke could not explain Ethan's motive for abandoning his territory to chat with him. That's right. I saw those orcish minor leaders carrying sophisticated human weapons, so I came over specifically to ask if that was possible. This was an excuse Ethan made up on the spot. He didn't need to provide any evidence anyway. The two tacitly refrained from speaking out. Saul lit his pipe and slowly said, "This is a closely guarded secret most minor nobles wouldn't know. Even our family was lucky to hear rumors about it." After revealing this information, Thor stopped talking and waited quietly for Ethan's reply. "A gold coin?" Ethan asked tentatively. "I want to trade another one of your secrets." He thought to himself, how did your knights advance so quickly? Thor had already inquired with Viscount Northwind. The newcomer had only brought 3 first-tier knights, yet they had all advanced to second-tier after just a few months. He was eager to know what could allow someone to quickly advance to the rank of knight. "Secrets are secrets meant to be kept in your heart, so let's just name our price." Ethan evaded the question with an air of ease. He had many secrets and he couldn't entrust any of them to anyone else. Seeing that his probing was not working, Saul bluntly offered to tell him the answer for free. "The Wasteland province is vast, with long borders, and there are many lords, large and small, just like us. There had always been numerous open and covert struggles between the orcs and humans, both above and below them, until one day, one of the orcs suddenly realized the truth and learned the art of befriending distant states while attacking nearby ones. The meaning is quite clear. Someone is betraying the orcs and helping them fight against other lords. Doesn't the Empire care? The adults in the central region don't care about these things. After all, the Empire and the Beastmen have an agreement. Plundering is allowed, but seizing land is not. And the Minotaur tribe next to us. Most of them received funding from Viscount Westwood next door. What if one side rises to the rank of Earl and grows powerful and then seeks revenge?" Saul's eyes narrowed. Since the agreement took effect, not a single Viscount has been promoted to a higher rank. He stood up and patted Ethan on the shoulder. "Do you know why you're the only pioneer knight on the border? Having a pioneer order is like splitting up the family fortune. You're no longer the young master of the Earl's family in the central region. This means they were easy prey in the eyes of those powerful nobles. Imperial law forbids any pioneering knight from receiving assistance from any family upon arriving in their territory." Thor emerged from the house, filled with hope for Ethan, but never imagining that Ethan would cross the border back into the heart of the Empire. That's something no one has ever done before. Ethan watched the flames flicker in the fireplace, and as these secrets gradually connected, he roughly arrived at a vague answer. "My stepmother, whom I took for granted, is starting to exert her influence. That guy probably offered Viscount Northwind some benefits which made him willing to risk alienation and betrayal to collude with the Beastmen. Now that the food has been provided, what's the next step? That's so hard to guess. In that case, there's no need to speculate about when Log Town will be attacked." Ethan declined Thor's offer to stay the night and headed straight back to his territory. Upon returning, Ethan immediately summoned everyone. This was a matter of life and death. Seeing the bewildered and sleepy group, he got straight to the point. "Take some of the people who are maintaining the fields and train them. They will have plenty of food, train them however you like. The rest of the soldiers should not slack off either. Even if there's a blizzard tomorrow, you still have to keep practicing." Rasu, puzzled, asked, "Master, what's wrong?" Despite today's resounding victory, the master acted as if facing a formidable enemy, as if a massive orcish army would be ravaging the area tomorrow. "I've received confirmation that the orcs' main attack will be focused on Log Town, so we need to be on guard." The words "focus of the attack" weighed heavily on everyone's hearts, and for a moment everyone fell silent. Even Wolf felt a sense of unease. She understood what this meant. Log Town was about to face a combined attack from several small tribes. Ah Fen spoke up. "Master, regardless of whether they know a new territory has been established here, we are penniless and destitute. Why would they come looking for trouble? You don't need to worry about the source of the information, it's accurate enough. Your job is to execute the orders." Seeing their master's serious expression, the group became even more tense. Their master couldn't possibly harm them, so it really must be a beastman invasion. Pass on the training methods to the soldiers who have already completed their training. The territory always needs a few promising young talents. Ethan uttered this outrageous act casually, but he possessed absolute authority. The three knights exchanged glances and decided to obey. After the meeting, Wolf patiently massaged his shoulders. "Who is targeting you?" Although she was young, she had already experienced several raids and was very familiar with the process. Generally, the tribes would act separately, gather together after seizing enough money and food, and launch an attack on key targets. That is, slaughtering fat sheep. Unless it's for revenge, the orcs won't act irrationally. After all, they're either starving or forced into war. It's probably my ill-intentioned stepmother. In our tribe, even the greatest mistake one can make is being expelled from the tribe and becoming a solitary creature wandering the wilderness. Ethan touched her cheek from below. "Your tribe's people are quite nice, unlike us, who are locked in a life-or-death struggle from the moment we leave our homes. The warriors on our territory train just as fast as our tribe. We will win." Time is what Ethan needs most right now. Time was like a lifeline for Ethan, something he clung to tightly, afraid to let go. He had already verified that even the flying trio's training progress was affected by the born warrior skill. They even felt like they had experienced a second spring in their lives. Those soldiers and the serfs who were about to become new soldiers also needed time to hone their skills and mature. 4 times the training speed is very fast. One spring is enough to turn them into a year's veterans, and another summer will make them a formidable team. But it's too late now. In order to survive, Ethan let them eat as much as they wanted, with meat at every meal, and they lived like gods for a week. Just as Ethan was trying to find a way to get some meat, news came from the scouts in the north. A small orcish force arrived near Log Town. Ethan dared not gamble on whether they would attack during the day, so he could only personally oversee the defense and be on high alert. Fortunately, this team is quite reasonable. Of course, it's also possible that they didn't take this barren territory seriously. The leader of the small group glanced at the place and complained that there was no profit to be made from taking it down. If it weren't for the pressure from above, he wouldn't want to waste his time and energy in a place like this. Just as he burst through the gate, intending to rush in and slaughter as usual, he was met with gleaming, silver spears. These soldiers have developed quite good qualities through long-term training. Their only drawback is that they have never seen blood. Now, these beastmen have used their lives to make up for this deficiency. Scattered soldiers are unlikely to gain an advantage against a well-organized army, even if the army in front of them can only be described as a small square formation. Before long, they were surrounded and wiped out by another squad. Ethan spared no orc. They were not only enemies but also walking military achievements. After being bathed in blood, this earliest trained unit of 35 soldiers acquired a chilling aura which pleased Ethan greatly. The method of distributing cultivation techniques was Ethan's way of giving them a chance to leap over the dragon gate. Unfortunately, none of them seized the opportunity. The 3 knights and their squires taught them diligently based on the minimum 1-month timeframe for their spiritual development. None of them could muster even a shred of fighting spirit. Ethan couldn't say it out loud since only a week had passed, but they were given good food and drinks every day to replenish their energy, which made their bodies visibly stronger and more robust. Ethan simply told them to train hard, but his focus shifted to the newly selected able-bodied serfs. This group was of a lower quality than the first group and numbered only 60. They were all the people in the territory who could currently complete the initial test. It can be said that if both groups of able-bodied men in Log Town were to die, the town would not even have enough people to farm. This group will be trained as a reserve force. Their food will be much worse than that of the first group, but at least they will be able to eat their fill. Joe was in charge of these people, and the results were unexpectedly good. Perhaps he is very suitable to be an instructor. Judging by appearances alone, there wasn't a single serf in his own territory who could become a knight's squire. Ethan sighed, thinking that once this winter was over, he would definitely find a way to get some slaves. The three who had completed their servant training were already working on their breakthrough, and they wanted to do their part in this time of crisis for their territory. Ethan directly divided the energy essence into three parts. Whether he could break through depended entirely on luck. Although the effect was greatly reduced, one person actually broke through to the first rank and became a new knight under Ethan's command. This person's name is Cain. Influenced by the essence of energy, he was fortunate enough to awaken Earth attribute fighting spirit. This fighting spirit isn't particularly strong, but it's substantial enough, making it suitable for knights who prioritize defense. However, even with this breakthrough, his position and status in the territory remained unchanged. Aside from Wolf, there are 4 Tier 2 warriors in the territory, which is far beyond what a newly advanced Tier 1 warrior like him could possibly challenge. Even so, this guy's foundation is very solid, much stronger than the flying trio. 3 days later, it snowed heavily. A new orc race has arrived, hyenas and jackals as well as snow deer and minotaurs. They gathered together to accomplish a common goal of several tribes, to destroy the town before them, kill its lord and take his body back. 4 tribes, that's enough to make this town proud. We already sent out a team to probe their strength. They only have about 30 soldiers. That's probably their entire force. The hyena leader looked at the Minotaur sitting in the main seat. This man, who had intricate connections with the Minotaur tribe, held the highest position among them and was naturally in charge. The warrior with the bull's head slowly said, "Viscount Northwind has provided us with very generous supplies, enough to feed our 4 tribes for more than a year, so we are not in a hurry and can proceed slowly." "You mean, wait until things have calmed down before asking Viscount Northwind for help?" The Minotaur remained silent, which was taken as tacit agreement. Everyone present laughed. This was the approach that best served their interests. Anyway, now the Viscount is asking them to do things, and according to the rules, civil war between nobles is not allowed during periods of invasion. So attacking a small town is nothing more than a matter of how long it takes and how much reinforcements are needed, as long as the Lord doesn't run away right under their noses. Starting tomorrow, send a small squad every day to wear them down. Finally, when the enemy is complacent, launch a decisive attack. The Minotaur spoke casually, saying that Viscount Northwind had given him all the information. They were just 3 of the weakest first-tier knights, and it wouldn't take much effort. He felt that fighting a protracted war against such an enemy was an insult to him. If he weren't being paid to do it, he was confident that he could storm into the territory and wreak havoc all by himself. He is the illegitimate son of the current chieftain of the Wild Bull tribe. Even Viscount Northwind has to be careful when speaking to him for fear of bringing about his own destruction. Border nobles were looked down upon by the central nobles and orcs like rats struggling to survive in the cracks. They waited for the border nobles to grow up so they could kill and eat them, while treating them as slaves to whom they could take whatever they wanted from the land they cultivated. After all, the Wild Bull tribe was a large tribe with 3 heroic warriors, and its own warriors numbered in the thousands, not to mention the countless smaller tribes under its command. With their limited power, the wisest choice for the border nobles is to obediently kneel down and lick the feet of the beastmen masters. What he didn't know was how much his slacking off would help his opponent. What Ethan lacks most is simply time.